Concord hits a new record player count.
PS5 Pro and the conversation around costs. Hello and welcome to Triangle Squared, a PlayStation podcast. I am your host, Brett Beck, and alongside me, as always, is one Mr. Chris Figs. Chris, how you doing today?
I am just dandy, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing so good because guess what, Chris?
What, Brett?
As of tomorrow, I will have been taken higher.
Yeah? Where are you going?
Going to see Creed. A September 11th Creed show. God. Let's go, baby. I feel George Bush in this Chili's tonight.
Have you forgotten? What a song.
So, yeah, I know legitimately for everyone who shits on Creed, I'm legitimately excited to go see Creed. My wife bought me these tickets almost a year ago when they announced that they were coming back because it's my shit, man.
Creed bangs.
Creed bangs. That's Chris, you're a man of good taste, clearly. So
what can I say?
That means we're off on a good foot and we could start this podcast knowing that we are, we're starting in common ground. We'll see if that holds throughout the rest. Today, we are going to be, hold up. If you're new to the podcast, first and foremost, welcome. We are a PlayStation podcast, but we really talk about gaming through the lens of just being fans who primarily interact with the gaming industry through the lens of PlayStation, but we play other stuff like Chris's recent Steam Deck obsession and other things. So if that sounds like something up your alley, stick around. We hope that you have a good time. We are going to be talking about Concord's goodbyes and whether they are forever or temporary. We are going to be talking about PlayStation and how the Portal is apparently doing really well despite seeing low numbers and how they've determined that. The raising price of the DualShock and how it may have been a foretelling for the price conversation we're seeing now with the final reveal of the worst kept secret in gaming, the PlayStation 5 Pro. So with all that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get going into the starting of the show where we always check in on what each other have been playing so we can give each other either the next thing we think we should be playing or give you guys insight on what we've been playing and if there's something that you didn't have on your radar that maybe, just maybe, you should have. Chris, I always start with you, so let me get mine out of the way real quick.
Oh.
And then I'm going to throw it over to you because I think you've played a bit more than me. And then secondarily, we got to talk about our shared experience on a game that is no more. And that'll be interesting because we've talked a little bit about it. But first thing is I've been playing Cult of the Lamb, as I've mentioned. And at this point, I feel like I am reaching a point where I am legitimately questioning my enjoyment of trophies. And the problem is I am reaching that thing with Chris where the start of me wanting to platinum this game came from an actual enjoyment of the game. And while I still like the game, the fact that they've updated what was once a nice, well-rounded way to play the game, kind of get a load of everything that it has to offer and get a platinum out of it, around 15 to 20 hour mark from everything that I've looked up. Because I thought to myself, there's no way this game takes 40 hours to platinum and I'm still not even there. So yeah, around launch, this game took 15 to 20 hours to platinum and wasn't very RNG heavy at all. But they decided to update the game. And apparently because of the way the game handles a number of things, the game just keeps getting harder and harder to get the platinum for. Because essentially, from what I understand, the game's save system and how it builds up your save file and how it checks against trophies is essentially a true and false thing. So if the trophy says you need to unlock all fleeces, even if the fleeces have been added in an update, they count as fleeces. So the game says it is false. You do not have all the fleeces because these are all the things labeled as fleece. Therefore, you don't get the platinum. Now, that's fine if what they added was more reasonable to get. But the problem is everything that they added from both follower skins to tarot cards and to the fleeces relied heavily on RNG. So to get the Holy Talisman fragments, RNG. And basically what it is, Chris, is you've got to get these things called God tiers, which at first you can get from going back through all of the four normal worlds and beating the boss one more time. But after you've done that, you don't get them anymore from there. And instead, Purgatory opens, and you can go to it once a day, and it freezes time in your cult, and you run through and you get shards of god tiers, and then you get a god tier at the final boss of that run, and you have to spin them at this new god, and it spins a wheel, and it's like a roulette of what you're going to land on, and it may not be anything you fucking need.
Oh no.
And so I did that for about 20 hours.
Oh my god.
And did get to experience a lot of new fun stuff. And then they've added a bunch of new follower skins that have to be found in completely different ways. Some of them can be gotten from the wheel that you get, the roulette. So that's kind of nice. The other ones, you have to do what's called mating in the game, and you have to put 2 followers into a mating tent. And they have a really super rare chance of creating a golden egg. And a golden egg hatches a rare follower form that you can only get through that interaction. I've gotten one.
So you're shiny hunting in Cult of the Lamb?
So here's the thing. I got all the fleeces. I got all the tarot cards. All I have left now is follower skins.
It sucks.
And I feel like I'm in purgatory. So that's my complaint of the day. It's not even really a complaint on the game. I understand that it is what it is, but I do think that there's something to be said where I do wonder if they made the changes to the game with thoughts on how it would impact the platinum, and if they wanted that impact on the platinum, or if it was just not thought of at all and the platinum just accidentally got harder. Because I'm a big fan of when I think a platinum does a good job of making you experience everything in the game, which I think is an ideal platinum, right? Now, there are cool ones that are much harder to get, like Mortal Shell. And I think that it'd be fair to say that you don't need to play Mortal Shell without a shell on in order to get the full experience. No, even though it is a very interesting added one. But to that point, I still think Mortal Shell is a fun trophy list, but I could definitely understand why someone would be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Because fair enough. But it is weird when games have got really good trophy lists and then suddenly they just change because of something weird. So that's always a shame. But outside of that, Chris, the only game I've really played is Concord.
Oh.
And that is due to Chris nudging. Well, there's one other game, but I think we'll probably talk about that in a minute. I don't know, Chris, did you start Astrobot?
I listened to the menu screen for 20 minutes, and then we started recording. Menu screen.
Okay, so I'll do quick. I didn't get to play nearly as much because I've been just grinding out Cult of the Lamb still as much as I don't want to. So today I wanted to make it a point to play Astrobot. So when I got home from work in the very limited time, I had about 30 to 40 minutes with the game. I did 2 levels all the way through where I found every secret. The game is incredibly charming, just as I expected. It looks and runs incredibly well. It's very clean, no bugs. It's one of those great games where it's kind of timeless in the fact that it's not trying to be hyper real at all. Therefore, this game will look just as good in 30 years as it does right now. And that's really cool to see. The music is really fun. There's something to be said. I love platformers. I just think that they're really great games and they do a lot of interesting things with mechanics. But one thing I didn't realize I missed so much was actually getting to feel the DualSense at full use. When every material's got a different feel and you're walking through grass and it feels kind of thick in comparison to the kind of low thud of walking on a rock, or like stone. And then when you walk on metal and it's very tinny sounding and kind of sharp, and feeling, it's weird. It's I think that the game does a really good job of mixing the haptics with the sound coming out of the controller speaker to create a feeling that extends beyond one or the other. You could do just the sound or just the haptics, and they would be cool, but they wouldn't really sell you on it. But together, they really push you the extra way. So I'm excited to dig more into it. I was glad to see that pretty early on they have third-party characters that are highly connected to PlayStation in the game and celebrated, and that's great. Definitely want to see that. So with that in mind, I can't wait to play more of it, but I also want to get rid of ever having to think of Cult of the Lamb again because I'll have the platinum. So, Chris, Concord, you played it. you kind of, I don't want to say you defended it, but in a weird way, you talked about it and thought that the game was maybe better than it was getting credit for.
I still think that's true, for the record.
You played more of it, yeah. So I'm going to give you a quick, way to hop into it, and then we can kind of talk about our shared experience with it. But as it's now no longer around, and we know that this game is deceased, we talked a lot while we were playing it.
We did.
And I think that a lot of what was said has been mirrored and echoed by a lot of the other people that are talking about it in the online sphere. And I guess it's... I want to start the conversation by, I guess, reiterating that I am genuinely surprised. Even as someone who doesn't like the games as a service trend and doesn't really play multiplayer games, I never thought Concord was just going to blow the world up in sales.
Well, but
I legitimately never expected.
Take a quick step back, because this is a bi-weekly show. Sony announced that Concord is dead. A week ago? They basically put out a blog post and were like, hey, we heard you. We're taking the game offline, and we're reevaluating ways to reach our customers. So that, to give a little bit of background so that anyone who only consumes this as their gaming news will understand. So Concord is dead. It's now a graveyard. I don't know necessarily what to really say about it more. I think it's a game that was done dirty in some ways, but I also don't necessarily think that it would have landed had it not had the conversation that it did around it. Because I think one of the things I've always maintained is that it's good, right? Like I've never been one of these people who's like online, like full on capping, like, oh, it's one of the best shooters. It's not one of the best shooters of all time. It never was one of the best shooters of all time. It was simply good enough, and that's how I felt about it. I know you were a little bit different than me.
Well, let's take a step back real quick, because before we lose the plot on this, I kind of do want to dig into, you're of the mind that the game was done dirty. Now,
a little bit, yeah.
Can we expand on what that is? How was it done dirty, and who was it done dirty by? Is there multiple people involved in this, or what do you think? Is this like a done dirty by PlayStation, done dirty by the fan base, or by the players, or done dirty by internet discourse? Or is this?
Well, I think it's all tied into each other, because I don't think Sony did the game any favors, because A, they didn't market it, and B, nobody who was watching that game went, no, these are boring characters. No, this is boring. This is boring. This is boring. Because that's one of those things. You have to get past what's boring about it to see the good stuff, right? You just have to not care about the character designs, and that's okay for you. But I do think that the discourse around the game was extremely toxic, and I don't think it was warranted. I think it was really dumb, and it was very much a symptom of the internet age. Like these devs are getting run off Twitter and run offline because they made a game that people didn't like. And I think that sucks. But I think the thing that sucks the most about it is Concord dies, and then people are like, oh, well, should have brought back Killzone. And then it's like, okay, so then are we just not interested in trying new things? Like it's a very much a weird thing, because you'll see a post on Twitter or X or whatever the fuck, Threads. You'll see a thread on Threads talking about, okay, Sony's always going back to the same thing. Sony's always doing the same thing, and they do something new, and people don't like it. Now, to be clear, Concord is not the game that I would champion as this was Sony's big new IP, right? Because none of those characters would have ever been mascots, right? Like, there's no Astrobot equivalent in there, unless you like people in rain jackets and Converses. Like, there's really nothing for you in terms of a PlayStation mascot, right? But I think that the thing that I had the biggest problem around Concord was not that people didn't like the game, because anyone is entitled to an opinion to not like Concord or not like any game, right? I don't like Horizon at all. And I am very much entitled to that opinion, even though it is the opinion of the small minority, right? And people are entitled to not like Concord. I think what really frustrated me as someone who was playing it and enjoying it was seeing things online from people who hadn't played it and didn't know anything about the game other than some YouTube trailers. And then I think that combined with the discourse put people off Concord. It was even to the point where I bought it, and I bought it strictly because I'm like, I host a PlayStation podcast. I like shooters. I'll give it a shot, you know? So that's where I came from. I don't know that I would have bought this outside of that, because the writing was on the wall based on how people were talking about it. I just don't like that people were talking about it that way and being like, especially being actively mean to developers. I think that's just something that should never be done. You know, I don't care how Grums has made you feel about these people or whatever. There's still people who made a game, you know, did more for video games than a lot of us will ever do, right? And we're running them off Twitter because you didn't like the design of their characters or the game that they did bombed. Like, this got to be a terrible experience for them. And I think all of that combined, especially with people not having touched the game, talking unimaginable shit about it, did no favors to a game that needed a little bit of goodwill, you know? So that's, I think, the biggest problem that I had with it, is that the game was DOA because it wasn't Killzone.
Yeah, I think we could talk to that for a minute, because as someone who often champions Resistance and Killzone and some of these oft, beloved PS3 IP, that I think we were talking recently, right? I was talking about how PlayStation's exclusive IP need to hit a different reach now than they used to be even thought of. Is this even worth funding? And I think a really good example of that is that even sort of early into the PS4 life cycle, but definitely for the PS3 life cycle, an exclusive IP from PlayStation hitting 1 or 2 million was okay.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. Did they want more from it? Absolutely. But There are a number of PlayStation 3 exclusives that hit somewhere in that, 2 million, if you got lucky, 3 million range. And it was just like, okay. But I think PlayStation's viewpoint was different, right? They were on the back foot. They needed exclusive IP to be the reason to buy this system that was beleaguered at launch, and it was so expensive. And, it was all these things that might have been considered behind the competition. And so they were willing to spend that money, even if they just basically broke even, because at the end of the day, the business for PlayStation was, and still is to an extent, making money off of people buying your system and then buying the rest of their games on your system, not necessarily your exclusives. Exclusives are just a means to an end to attract customers with something that can only be played on your system. So I love those IP. I think they're fantastic. I think anyone, and I say this with love, I think anyone who is deluding themselves right now into thinking that without a lot, and I mean a lot of legwork most likely necessary, I don't think Resistance, I don't think Killzone, Starhawk, no, most likely not. Warhawk, also most not likely. SOCOM, maybe. But I want to throw this in there and say that none of those would have been something worth putting this much money and put stuff behind, because Sony has all the metrics they need to know that those games do not reach the audience that the budget they were giving this game was going to ever find. The only thing I will tell you is that this being a brand new IP, if it was going to fail, it clearly seems like it was going to completely fail. And I think when you look at the fact that the IP has no strength, and I mean that in the real sense if you look at it, and it doesn't really have an identity, something I was saying even when it comes to the art, the controller, it lacks a strong sense of, I look at this and I see it and I go, Concord. And I think that that's interesting to say, because to take a quick step back into, I did play the game. I agree with Chris. The game is well made. And I think its biggest problem is that it was well made, looks good, ran good. Relatively, I didn't experience any real bugs.
Nope.
It was very smooth. And I think the problem is it didn't do anything that it's double-edged. It didn't do anything to make me go, oh, not only does this game not have any identity in art style or anything like that, it also has no identity in gameplay, because its gameplay is literally just every other death shooter or team deathmatch, and all these. The game modes didn't feel unique to it. The gameplay didn't feel unique to it. Nothing did. It was all well made and a core of a good game, but it was uninspired, and it just did not inspire any sense of, I should play this outside of these other games that have got 3, 4, 5, hell, 8 years of extra development on top of them, like Overwatch 2, and at a charge of $40. So I think all that was working against them. But I think one of the things that we kind of mentioned, I think even last week, but I know Chris and I have mentioned it to each other in private, I think we really want to look at IP that PlayStation could have done this with and could have actually tried doing something. I think they should have paid attention to the fact that Concord did not seem to necessarily... Let me back up. I don't know this for sure. I don't have sources. So this is going to be a little bit of guesswork that I think is probably sussed out, though not always is this the case. Considering how poorly this game did, somewhere in testing this game, there had to have been an understanding that this game was not strong enough to really stand on its own. It had to have been that Sony knew that this was a possibility, and they were just hoping against hope that they could make it happen and just put it out there because they were already invested in it enough. What I think would have been nice to see is to go back, reconsider what's going on, look at your testing, see that people don't really find Concord to be very compelling as an IP, and I'm sure that has to be part of testing, right? It has to be, how do you feel about this brand? When you see this, does it make you feel anything? Does it feel unique? Does it feel, that's got to be part of focus testing. It just has to. And I think that once it became obvious that the game wasn't strong enough as a brand to stand on its own, and that it seemed like it was unlikely to be able to, the real question should have been, why don't we look at the fact that Naughty Dog's wanting to step away from a mostly developed game, and you guys are wanting to develop a games as a service? And we'll never know the answer. But I genuinely wonder if it was ever even considered. Would you guys have more interest in working on Factions so that we don't throw away a game that would have done well? It would have done well enough is the real thing. Would Factions be the next Apex? Probably not. Would Factions have made plenty of money and been a well-loved game that's a sequel to a gameplay style of a game that came out on PS3 and people are still playing the online mode today? Let's look at that, right? Don't point your arrow in the wrong direction. Sony's got IP that are more memorable, more monumental, and more apt for this style of development that I think you need to look and go, why didn't Sony do a better job of realizing early enough that this was probably not going to work? And I don't want to dogpile on the game. Like Chris said, I think that there's enough to be said. The game is well made, and there was clearly a lot of things going on, and Chris, I'm going to let you give your, whatever you want to add to this. But I do have an article up that I think is interesting. And of course, take it with a grain of salt. But there are people from the art team and the game developers who are actually talking about some of the issues with this game and how it seems to have come about. But
from Firewalk's art team?
Yes.
I'm going to be honest, I had something to say and I totally lost it. So we can just go to the article.
Well, this is over on GameReactor.eu, and it is an interview that they've done, with one of the people in the art direction team. So one of the game's developers, Amanda Kiefer, is partly due to the lack of an overall design plan. Even worse, the person says that the executives simply didn't listen to the feedback or complaints of the production team, which you can read about in a post from this person on their now locked X account. So the quote here is, I'm just going to say this here. A lot affected the art side of Concord, including design by committee, failure of some leadership to listen to the art team, etc. The character concept art team, including myself, is going through an extremely difficult time emotionally, and some of the team no longer want to work in games, design characters, or even do art anymore after the experience with this game. So there's not a lot here, and I want to be clear that this is based on secondhand information. This is not something that's been tracked down and sourced considerably. But point being, this is one person's truth of what happened. And I think it goes to show that some of what we've already thought seems to be at play here. Design by committee tends to be an issue in big, expensive games. And I get it, right? Because you're developing a game. This is the big problem between art and money, right? The people who are funding the game are going, we're giving you this many millions of dollars. We want to make sure that we're doing a good job having a game that strikes all the design aspects that you'd expect from a modern game that we can get brownie points for. And they go through and be like, we need this, we need one of those, we need one of those. And not to think, have you ever thought that maybe you just need what works for the game and what the people are excited about creating? And that kind of stuff can ruin games, even when it's not strictly about character design. That can be other things. That can be, hey, Visceral, we need you to put co-op into Dead Space 3. And also, we need it to just be a random guy and not add to the story. And we need multiplayer. And, it's like all these weird things where it's like, but if no one on the game development team was excited about co-op or just are excited about multiplayer, why did you push it on them? But it's another box to check. Well, we're putting a lot of money in you. We need this game to hopefully do well. We need to check the multiplayer box. We need to check the, whatever it was for this game. What was the box? What was the design? We don't actually know, but it sounds like they felt like at least this person didn't have a lot of control in contributing towards what the art style or the characters were going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot of shit about Grum, so I hate bringing him up, but he does have this whole thing where he talks about people who were on the team in leadership positions. There are very specific things that these people believed about themselves and about the world around them that they put into this game and refused to listen to anybody else's feedback. So that's already been out there. So I fully believe that. Whether you want to make it about their sexuality or whatever, or their gender, whatever the hell you want to do, you have that conversation elsewhere. But I think if you look at kind of what's been talked about, and then even the article you brought up, I think it's very clear that at the bare minimum, the people in charge here failed. I think that's a bare minimum take that you can come in here with, because I think the thing is, right, somebody had to approve all of these designs. So we can talk shit about the artist who designed Roka, who was one of my favorite characters, but she's literally just gray. That's her whole character. She's gray with a rocket launcher, right? That's all she is. And I loved her gameplay, but she's fucking boring, right? So do I blame the artist for designing a shitty character, or do I blame Ryan Ellis, whatever that guy's name was who wrote the article? Do I blame him? And the reality is I blame him. He's the game director. And I think that's what sucks about a lot of this is I've been on this show talking about, hey, sometimes the employees are at fault. And that is true. But the buck does stop with these people. And when you make a game that does so catastrophically bad, and I think a lot of the things that could have been fixed about it are very clear, you have to question like the higher ups. So we can blame Herman Holst, and maybe we should blame Herman Holst, or maybe we blame Jim Ryan, and guess who's no longer leading PlayStation, right? But I think it also has to come down to the people who are at that studio. So that's why, I think it sucks that a lot of these devs are getting attacked on Twitter or X or Threads, whatever the hell you want to call it. But because they're not the ones who approved all of this stuff. I am sure that there is a badass Roka design out there that somebody, for whatever reason, whatever side you're on, decided to axe it. I'm sure there is. because it's not hard, because I guarantee you, and you've used the program, I could go to DALL-E 4 right now and design a better character in literally 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard about all this.
I want to take a step back to actually say the thing that I think would have probably worked in the best in the game's favor. And I think that would have been, look, the art style is uninspired. Like I said, nothing about the game really just screams an identity to me, which I think is an issue. But one of the things that I said to you while we were playing is that even games that often get criticized for bad art or anything like that, if they are fun enough, that starts to not matter again. So gameplay can definitely trump visuals and can still lead to people finding a thing. And I really what I want to go through here is that while this game is totally it's robust, it's well designed, nothing about it feels unique. And I think that there's something to be said, even if everything else about the game was exactly the same, art style, character design, all those different things. You even said yourself, you like a way that a couple of the characters played. Are they necessarily breaking crazy new ground there? No. But okay, you have something that you clicked into. I like the way that the characters play, and I don't even have to think about the way they look whenever I'm playing as them because it's in first person. I don't really need to worry about it too much. All right, cool. Let's pull out and go. Even if the game had a rough art style, what if it had a single game mode that made you go, this is unique? Even if someone else has done it, it's very seldom done in this area. This makes me want to play this. And a good example, go towards Factions, what we were talking about. Part of what made Factions blow up is at the time that Factions came out, and even to this day, there are not a lot of multiplayer games that kind of do this lopsided ability to heal, pull your teammates up, and it's very gritty and real, limited resources, build. It's a very different type of multiplayer game, and so it got popular for that. And then the other end of the spectrum, which I think is worth mentioning, is that Gambit in Destiny is, I don't even care about the multiplayer in Destiny. I'll tell you right now, Gambit slaps. It's so fun. It's really good, and it's unique, and it's something that when I think of Destiny, I think about Gambit almost before I think about anything else. And I'm not even a huge multiplayer fan. And that goes to show you, I'm not saying that this team needed to completely invent the next new, never before seen multiplayer thing. But I'm saying something more inspired and something more like we're going to try and do a spin on something that you've never seen before, in conjunction with having characters that are admittedly fun to play and varied so that they have very different feel. Because Chris can account, I tried playing about 4 or 5 different characters in the limited time that I had, and they all felt drastically different, which is great. In a game like that, you want the characters to feel like they're difficult a little bit to pick up their specifics so that you want to learn and keep using that character so that you can build up a familiarity. And then when you go to a new one, you don't want it to feel just like Hamar. You don't want it to feel just like Roka. You want it to feel unique and different. And so my real complaint about the game is as much as the gameplay was well done, it was so uninspired that it just, no one would choose to stay here.
Right.
I think when you look at Apex was like, okay, we're looking at something kind of like what you've been seeing with, what is it? Players Unknown Battleground, PUBG. And we're adding in what is controversial for a lot of people, but a lot of people really like, and it's unique in the area, the ability to wall run and do crazy acrobatic moves tied into that with really tight gameplay in a first person setting. Okay, cool. That's unique. That's different. Okay. Call of Duty, I don't even know what to say about it because it's just, hey, we're doing Apex, but it's Call of Duty. But Call of Duty is the biggest IP, so it doesn't really matter,
Right, exactly.
Halo's got a lot of interesting things that are exclusive to it, including custom game types. Like, I almost wonder if this game had a custom game mode generator, would someone might have found a way to just be like, I made a fun game within this. I made a fun thing that we can do to where you play it this way and it changes the way the game feels. So I think that's the biggest damning factor here, is that I've played games that looked worse and ran worse and I thought were way more fun, like Ubisoft's hardly anyone knows about it, but Cell Factor Cyberkinetic Wars. Let me see. Cyberkinetic. Let me see if I can find it. It's a Ubisoft game. And it was really fun. And it's an arena style shooter. So another one of those Cell Factor Psychokinetic Wars was a PS3 and 360 game. And it was more fun than this because it had a unique thing that was to it. I've seen games that are obviously trying to ape something else and still end up having their own feel that work. There's a game that came and it was called like oh man, it was a Halo-like shooter on PlayStation that had a weird name, and I don't know why I cannot think of the name of it. But the guy even looked like he was trying to rip off Master Chief. And if I could think of the name right now, I'd love to. It actually got 2 games, and I just can't think of the name of it. Someone out there is going to know what I'm talking about. And it's killing me that I can't think of the name of it. But point being is it was clearly trying to ape Halo, and yet it was memorable. And I will probably remember it, even though it's a 2008 PS3 game, far more than I remember anything about about Concord. So I don't know. We don't have to stay on it for too much longer. I just think it's an interesting thing to see happen. But as much as the design seemed to be something worth mentioning, I think a lot of it comes down to it's just the gameplay wasn't there.
Yeah, I don't know. This kind of feels like the opposite of the 38 Studios thing, where 38 Studios was trying to make a multiplayer, so they made a banger ass single player game. And I feel like these guys should have made a banging ass single player game and then made this. Because I think you obviously didn't watch it, but or you probably didn't even
go through
Section
8, by the way, is the game.
Oh, good. Great album. So you didn't play it, but they have a good setup. The cutscenes were cool enough. The galaxy map was fucking awesome. That was probably one of the coolest things in the game. So you would go around that galaxy map, and all the lore for the world was there, and it was expansive. So for me, it's like, why don't you give me all of this in a single player game, and then give me a multiplayer suite, or give me you really loved Concord? Well, here's Concord the shooter, and then do it that way. But like they just did it wrong. It's like trying to bring the Justice League in after one movie. It doesn't make any fucking sense. And this is what they did here. But
I think you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in some regards, because I think when we're looking at a lot of the problems that this game seems to have, they seem to be pretty in line with what people thought was an issue of Suicide Squad. Now, Suicide Squad at least had a little bit more of it was trying to have an identity at the very least.
Yeah.
And I think it failed ultimately and had a very bland looking city. And a lot of people talked about how the art design for the overarching city was just far more drab and boring than any of the 3 Batman games that we had before that from the same developer, which goes back to what we were talking about, right? The Rocksteady that made Suicide Squad is probably not the Rocksteady that made Arkham Knight or Arkham City or Arkham Asylum or even Arkham Origins, which is, to be fair, that wasn't Rocksteady at all. But when you look at all that, I think it's fair to say that Suicide Squad had a very similar problem, and it actually did have a story, and it did have cutscenes and all these things that were trying to not put all their eggs in just the how fun is our multiplayer gameplay basket, which I think is Concord's biggest problem. Its primary basket was that, and its secondary basket was going to be storytelling through character vignettes weekly and hoping that people will like it enough to come back to where that even starts to be a hook. But the problem is that that's not a hook day one. So it's not, or rather I should say it's not an alternate hook day one. So if someone's not immediately sold on how fun the gameplay is, they can't even get lost in how interesting the characters are. I would almost wonder, what would be a way to do this? Would you do what seems to be kind of like what they did with Overwatch, where you take all these characters and you give them a really cool day one launch. When you go to a character, you see a video play. It's a CG video that kind of sets up this character, makes you kind of want to root for them, even if it's really short. And then you go see more of these characters in the weekly vignettes. And then every vignette would be different. It would explore different characters, but you'd have more of a reason to be like, they set up Haymar and I actually kind of like her. And instead, what they seem to rely on was that state of play video, which did try to do this, right? Well, we're setting up Haymar and what her what her personality's like, and we're setting up this guy and what his personality's like. But the game didn't have that day one, from what I could tell.
No, they did.
So, did they have a vignette day one?
Yeah, you skipped it the second. You probably just held X and skipped it, but that was the cutscene that plays. There were 3 or 4 different ones. I'm not accusing you of not paying attention.
No,
literally.
It's worth mentioning. Chris invited me, and the game literally skipped everything and went directly, which is kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, it was nice.
to be invited and immediately go in without having to do the rest. But the game also seemed to get stuck in this weird loop where after Chris and I would leave, the game would try to go through the entire PlayStation Studios logo and everything again, and then the game would matchmake us again quick enough that I wouldn't even be able to get to the screen to do anything. So I'll give you that, Chris. Maybe my complaints are completely baseless and it's still ultimately the same problem. But
I'm not saying they're baseless. I just think these should have been
more front and center.
Well, they were, because it was literally like you'd launch the game and then the vignette would start playing. And those
so the weekly vignette would be literally as soon as you log into the game?
Yeah, it was every time you logged into the game, which was actually one of my issues with it, with the vignette style, was like it should have just been a checkbox of, do you want to see this? Yes or no? Okay, there it goes. But look, either way, I think we've talked enough about Concord, but we should probably bring in a question, no?
We should bring in a question, and it comes from our Discord. And if you want to be part of that, you can head over to Discord, or you can head down in the link in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast services. Hop in there, and in our announcement section where we called for questions, we had Rude Days 93, longtime listener, longtime patron. And he says, do you think we ever see Concord again? Chris, you played more of it than I did, considerably. Mm-hmm. And I think you have more of a grasp on even that type of market, admittedly, than I do. What is your intuition here?
No, Concord's gone.
I noticed that you said you thought the tweets and everything that they put out felt very permanent goodbye rather than a until we meet again.
Yeah. A lot of it, I don't know. It's just the way that some of the stuff was said. You know, oh, thanks for joining us on our journey. If the journey wasn't over, you know, you wouldn't say that, right?
Or you'd add the rest of the modifiers, right? Like, thank you for joining us on our journey, and I can't wait for you to start to join us again.
I can't wait to try and bring you back.
Yeah, but I think that's what a lot of it is, right? The wording is more, I think they're trying not to be too open-ended so they don't get people's hopes up who did like it, because if they choose to kill it, they don't want people, because I'll say the way that human minds work, when you promise people that you're going to turn something around and then you just give up on it, that's almost worse than giving up on it to begin with. Yeah. And I say that because I thought everything around what EA announced and BioWare announced with Anthem Next sounded awesome. And they were still doing cool stuff with the base game. And I was like, good, they're going to turn this game around. They're going to have their No Man's Sky moment. It sucks that games have to have those, but at least it's here. They're going to do it. And then when they announced, like, yeah, we're not doing any of that, I was just like, are you fucking kidding me? I would have rather you just told me that from day one.
Yeah.
Or shut the fuck up and not say anything about it and just come back out and re-release, add to the game.
I was always kind of hoping that they were going to do free to play. I thought that made the most sense rather than shutting it off and refunding and all of this kind of stuff. But I don't know, man. Like, I don't have Concord in my account anymore. And that seems like a very deliberate move, because I still had Cyberpunk in there. It just had a lock, but like it doesn't it's not even in there anymore. I think that game is like, I think once Secret Level comes out, that's when we'll know if Concord is going to come out again. It's going to come out in tandem with that Secret Level episode. And if it doesn't, it's done. And it's going to be super interesting to watch that episode.
Yeah, I'm very curious, because if they ended up canceling that would be really weird.
No, they already said it's coming.
It is for sure coming.
Cancel, okay, yeah.
That's good. That's good. But I don't know. I don't want to keep harping on the game either. I think it's unfortunate that people are going to have jobs lost from this, but I also wonder what lessons can really be learned. And Chris, this is where I want to defer to something that you say sometimes that I think might be beneficial. I know why they won't. Realistically, because no one wants any of the bad PR that comes from being so open with what a big company. And as we know, anytime you get a large group of people under a few people who are in control, it seems to be a pretty big breeding ground for some less than savory behavior to potentially be there. And then reporting on that is just bad PR that no one wants to have to go through. Yeah. But I think what's unfortunate about it is that I kind of hate that a lot of the times the lessons we have to learn from games that end up just crashing and burning has to come like 7 years later when people are finally willing to talk about it, and all the, all of the legal documents that they signed and NDAs have lifted and they can talk freely about it. And only now can we really learn all the horrible lessons of ways we should approach game development to not end up having these same issues. And I guess what I'm saying is, it sucks that there's no immediate way for anyone to learn a real lesson from this outside of Sony and Firewalk specifically. And all you can really hope for is that at least those two people learn something from this.
Yeah.
But it would be really nice if maybe, say, Haven could go, hey, what was the problem? Have you been able to loosely identify where you misstepped? Can you try and tell us where there might be pitfalls that we need to consider and be mindful of while we work on our game that is very much the same thing and will very much likely live or die in a similar fashion? And that's probably not going to happen. So that sucks.
Yeah. But. I mean, fair. Look, the last thing I'll say, Haven's got to be fucking shitting their pants.
I would be really surprised if they weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah. But my bigger question, what is Sony doing? And I say this because I think Sony this sounds weird. I think Sony had to make this mistake. I'm not even kidding. Mm-hmm. I think Sony had to realize, like, hey, you heavily invested in a market that you don't have much standing in. You're very late to the game. You haven't put enough work into being part of it. And you're trying to jump in by immediately buying studios and immediately trying to put out games that you think are going to be on the level of... There's so many things about it that I think Sony had to make this mistake. And I think that realistically, Sony can afford this mistake. It's a write-off at the end of the day, right? It doesn't matter. But I think Sony has to deal with the bad PR that's going to come from this, and the fact that the bad PR from this is going to stain every other multiplayer-only live service game that they attempt to put out in the future. And Concord as an IP is tainted. I've already said that. And I think that to answer the question, I don't know if we see Concord again, but I think the bigger question would be, who wants to see Concord again in a genuine fashion? And Chris, again, I get you, but you are one of, 100,000 people, whatever it was.
Less than that.
Yeah. Well, however many copies the game sold. And that's assuming that even everyone who bought the game wanted to like it and did like it. And so my point being is, when you have Sony over here talking about fostering IP from the beginning, yeah, they've done a poor job here, but the IP does not seem to have a strong enough basis to do much on. And it's like we were talking about before. It's an issue more so than that. Concord is an unproven IP. Firewalk is an unproven studio. You can't even do the thing where people go, we might believe in Concord like people did try to believe in Anthem because it's BioWare, and we know BioWare can make quality things. We don't have that connection with Firewalk. No one does. No one can look and go, oh, I know Firewalk makes bangers. Mm-hmm. So what is there left? An IP that didn't seem to resonate, and a studio that no one has any actual built-up love for yet.
Do you think Firewalk closes, or do they get another chance?
That was my next question. I don't know. I want to say one of the things is a lot of people, and I mentioned this to you while we were playing the game, that there was no way that game took 8 years to develop. There's no way. No. Absolutely no way. And that seems to be correct. Reports seem to indicate that it was a lot closer to 4 years, which is still a hell of a long time.
I guess. Yeah.
Look, it's a long time because, let's be real for a second. Think about the fact that multiplayer games, this is going to sound kind of damning, but outside looking in and having played enough multiplayer games, this game was as competent and as feature rich as multiplayer modes tacked on in Resistance and in Killzone and in fucking, every Call of Duty game where at most the game got 2 years of development, and that wasn't even the only part of the game being developed. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is 4 years to develop a multiplayer only aspect of a game that doesn't feel notably or mechanically or really anything too different from most of the secondary multiplayer modes that were in single player games is a not great spot to be in.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know, because what else do they work on? If they were bought to be this type of studio, what do? Do you actually go back through your IP that does have some cachet and go, is there a way to convert this IP into something that is games as a service so that we can still try to capture that market, but we can do so without having to rely on spending a lot of time and money on yet another IP? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, man. I hope they get another. I hope they just come out with something small or whatever, and they go, "Hey, there it is, it's a banger," and kind of show out. That's what they need to do.
Yeah. All right, Chris. But what else have you been playing? Because you have a big list here, so we need to hop through those real quickly.
Yeah, I won't say too much. Dino Crisis, I've been playing. That game fucking slaps. I didn't know that game slapped, and that game
classic
fucking
for
slaps.
A reason.
Yeah. I think, given it's an old game, I'd probably say a quarter of the way through. But I basically got to where the T-Rex comes through the window and eats the guy. That was pretty good. I love shit like that. I love games like this because they had me dying because I'm playing on Steam Deck, which is great. It's awesome for emulation. And I was just playing at bowling because my dad gets there like an hour early to set up his cameras. It's a whole fucking thing. And I just start cracking up in the middle of this theater because the character walks up. I think it's Rachel or something like that. She walks up to this man who's been bisected and just goes, "Gross."
Dude, late 90s, late 90s writing and voice acting for video games is, dude, it's like sarcastic.
Yeah,
almost. It has this like dryness to it that is so good that I don't think you could recreate if you were trying, because it's so of the era. It's so who the fuck can say this line? Becky.
Yeah, exactly. The worst is that the black tech guy, his dialogue is awful. Like, it is bad, but it is good. So yeah, you can consider me on Team Remake Crisis, Dino Crisis. I've played some Xenogears. Xenogears is great. Not a ton. It's a little choppy in emulation. I haven't really tried to fix that. Moonstone Island is a game I've been playing. That's a PC game only right now. PC and Switch. It's really good. If you like Pokemon and you like Stardew Valley, you should go buy this game right now. I don't have much more to say about this. But yeah, definitely play that. Let's see. Space Marine 1, that was Steam Deck. I'm playing through that, trying to kind of mainline it because I really want to play Space Marine 2. I'm very excited for that. I've got it on my console. I can't wait to make Brett play it, and we'll do co-op and kill the Horde. So I'm looking forward to that. But the biggest games I've been playing are No Man's Sky and Vampire Survivors and Crash 4.
So Crash 4, huh?
Yeah, I did it. I decided to start. And let me just say about Crash 4, there's no shot I'm ever getting this platinum. And you want to know why? Because I had to look up a guide for the first level to find the crates.
Yeah, you're hitting a really early block if that's the thing keeping you from it.
But here's the thing, I didn't have trouble getting through the level. I think I hit the platinum time or whatever. I did it in like 50 seconds.
Yeah.
But there was one crate that, like, you know how it has those like little jumping things? You know what I'm talking about? It was behind it and you couldn't see it. So I ran through this level, I shit you not, 30 times. And I was to the point where I would get to a certain part of the level and I'd go, yeah, I can't do this. Like, I won't get it. So I would just restart. And then eventually I'm like, I'm just looking this up, and I found it, and I got it all. But I really like it. I want, it's one of those things I want to get the platinum because it would be sick.
It would be sick, dude. And
But
also,
I don't think
here's what I'm excited to hear from you, though. Right? Take away the platinum for a second. Crash 4 is an incredibly well-made game.
Oh, it's an
incredibly well-made platformer, and it's a platformer of an ilk that we don't get very often these days. And I think Astrobot's there, but Astrobot is even up front. It doesn't take but 2 or so levels into Crash Bandicoot 4 to start being like, okay, this can get difficult at times, and like, dude, you have to be really on it and paying attention. Whereas Astrobot, 2 levels in, I haven't had to try at all. That's not a complaint, mind you. I like the type of platformer that Astrobot's currently being, and I do hope it difficulty curves up. But there's something to be said about how committed to being a difficult platformer Crash 4 is, and I love that.
Yeah, I just got the phase thing.
Oh yeah,
and I was
so good.
It's an awesome mechanic, but I was doing it, and I'm like, this is the 3rd level.
That's right.
Like, this isn't hard, but I know where this is gonna go, and that is spooky.
Yeah.
But I'm going to keep playing it. I'm going to make a concerted effort to get the platinum. I just do not think I have the skills, and I certainly don't like platformers enough to really do it, but I'm going to try.
You know what? Trying is all that matters, Chris. But one of these days, and maybe I'm wrong that you've already done it. Have you tried any of the Crash Insane trilogy?
No, I have not.
Yeah. Far more doable platinums, still very difficult.
Yeah,
just want to throw that out there.
I'm happy with my hard platformer being of the modern era. I don't need to do a hard platformer that is also a PS2 game. That sounds like a nightmare.
PS1.
That sounds worse. So I'm not doing it.
But very modernized, and I love that.
I'm sure it's
those
great,
games. Well, let me say this, right?
Core of PS1 design that scares me. Because the PS1 does not give a fuck about you as a person.
Part of the thing I love so much about Crash 4 is that its design implementation is very rooted in Crash 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Very. And I love that because I really think Crash started kind of losing its way once it hit PS2. And it wasn't immediate, right? Like Crash Twin Sanity and whatnot are not awful games. But it's just kind of like they stopped understanding how to move the character forward in any way, and it's like they lost a lot of the identity for the way that the challenge of it went, and it became more about gimmicks. And gimmicks are important in any game, right? It's kind of like we talked about with Concord and wanting to have something that feels unique to it, and how it doesn't really. And that's the thing, is like even Crash 4 has the gimmick of the phasing, which is a cool as hell mechanic, but it's also put to use in a cool way. So yeah, I don't know. I like to see that, and I'd be curious to see you attempt the Crash Bandicoot 1 Platinum, but I know I'm unlikely to ever see that. In a separate news, though, Chris, my buddy Donovan was telling me that he thinks that he agrees that I should be playing Persona 5. So,
wow. Everybody tells you that the best game on PS4 should be played by you.
Also, wanted to note that he said that he feels like going like Persona 5. This is going to sound interesting, but he said having played Persona 3 Reload and then looking at Persona 5, he's pretty sure that the reason that Persona 5 is everyone's favorite is that, and I want to throw it out there, most of the people who I know are like, Persona 5 is the absolute best and one of my favorite games of all time, have never played a Persona game besides Persona 5. And he says he thinks that Persona 3 is a way more interesting game in almost every facet, but Persona 5 has got it was a lot of people's first jump into the series, so it has that kind of anchor with him. I'd be curious to see how that plays out. He said he almost thinks that maybe I should play 3, 4 Golden, and then 5 and see how I feel about them all.
Okay. I'm talking specifically to Donovan. I've been trying for, how long have we been doing podcasts together? 5 years?
Long enough, yeah.
So I've been trying for, let's say about 5 years to get Brett to play Persona 5. Do not fucking try and convince him to play 2 other 100-hour RPGs first. I don't need that shit.
Yeah, the chances of me getting to the one that you know and can actually talk about are pretty low.
In terms of what he's saying, I don't know whether he's right or wrong about that, but I did play 4 and I've dabbled in SMT and the older Personas. Persona 5 is just fucking sick. Like the story of Persona 5 is fucking awesome. There's a moment that I am waiting for the message from you when the moment happens. The same way Sean was waiting for the message from me when the moment happened. And the only thing I said to Sean was, "What the fuck?" And he went, "I've been waiting for this for 2 weeks."
That's good.
So
never say never. The chances can definitely be there. I've just got to figure out how to reallot my game time and stop being a masochist with Cult of the Lamb.
You just got to understand that I am now going for the Crash 4 Platinum. And if I platinum a difficult platformer before you fucking turn on Persona 5, I will be so hurt as a person. Oh, God.
All right, Chris. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right. Anything else you need to talk about, or we want to move into the few pieces of news we'll cover before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode?
No, I mean, Vampire Survivors came out this summer, and it's very good.
PS5.
No Man's Sky.
Unfortunately, we didn't let people know that.
Yeah, I apologize that I didn't tell you that Vampire Survivors was coming out this summer. Really, I've known about this for years, and I've never talked about it on the show one time. It's really a bad thing that I did there. But yeah, and then I've been playing some No Man's Sky. I don't have much to say about No Man's Sky. It's weird because I don't like a lot of No Man's Sky, but the parts that I like about No Man's Sky, I like about No Man's Sky. You know what I mean? I was playing with Sean, and he really likes the exploration. And I found one planet that I really liked, and he was like, "Let's go do stuff." And I'm like, "No, I'm going to build this base, and that's all I'm going to do. If you want to go do stuff, you can." But I do think it's cool that you can be in the same multiplayer game, and he can be in an entirely different galaxy, but we're still playing multiplayer. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things they've done to make that game better. But I think that I really liked exploration, and I think I did so much of it in the early aughts of the game that I just don't think that it's actually... I think it's gone in me because ultimately the core of the game, despite being vastly built upon, is mostly the same. And I do think that for me as a player, an individual, I know that I tend to hit my maximum with a game where it's like, this particular loop is no longer going to work for me. And I just think that's what it is with No Man's Sky. I always think, it coming to VR2 is going to be the thing that pulls me back into it. It having multiplayer would be the thing that pulls me back into it. And it just doesn't. It's every time I try and give it like a couple of hours, and it's just like, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it was just the base building for me. But yeah, that's all I've been playing. I've been playing a smorgasbord of games. The Steam Deck is really good. I recommend you buy one. A lot of cool stuff that you can do with it. But I think it's a supplementary thing, so take that for what you will.
Well, let's talk quickly about the Steam Deck and all the ways that you've customized it.
Oh, yes.
Because one of the things that I really liked about seeing you do that is that you're getting excited about the same things I was getting excited about on PSPs in fucking 2007 and 2008. And I love that. Because one of the coolest things about getting PSP finally, broken open and using the Pandora's battery and everything and figuring all that out was that you had like pretty much unfettered access to the PSP. You can make it do whatever you wanted. And one of the things that people always liked was that it's not when you boot the system, but rather when you boot a game, certain games from certain publishers would do something interesting. Like if I remember correctly, the Prince of Persia one had like, it said PSP, but then it had like some kind of weird Prince of Persia related thing that happened to it. And it was like, oh, that's cool. And so people realized that you can just do the eboot.pbp or whatever and just change that. And you could go through it and say, I want it to be this. And so people started making custom ones. And that was so cool. And I remember one of the things that got me too, it's just the little things that were interesting to see at the time, right? People don't think about now when you have a cell phone that can just connect to the internet and is in multiple ways just a computer in your pocket with a different interface. People were recreating. Now, I don't know what you want to call it because I don't think it really was Windows. But for all intents and purposes, it looked and felt and ran like Windows Vista. And being able to boot into Windows Vista on a PSP just felt fucking wild. And it always got a reaction. So if you showed someone your PSP and you went to Windows Vista and you hit the button to go to the Windows thing and started browsing through, it was like people were like, this is the fucking future. And it's crazy how it wasn't that long afterwards that just stopped being important at all for people. But I miss that. Custom themes on PlayStation 3. That you didn't even have to jailbreak the PS3 for that. You just had cool-ass custom themes supported. PSP's custom themes. Man, so much cool stuff you could do. And it's cool to see people kind of having that little moment of customization coming back around with something like the Steam Deck. Because I do find that handhelds are the ultimate way to do that. Something about a handheld feels very personalized in a way that like a computer and a console doesn't to me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's history that I've only ever done that primarily.
And you can do all this stuff on PC, but yeah, it's really cool. Like I was showing Brett, like I sent him a video and it's got the way my Steam Deck opens. I have a bunch of different intros, but the one I have now is just like the Sheikah slate, and then it turns into the Steam Deck logo. And then you turn it off, and it's just this little image of Knuckles just dragging a curtain closed. And I'm like, this is good shit. But like I have on the console, like there's a PS3, like when the PS3 turns on, like it does that whole boot, except instead of PlayStation 3, it says Steam Deck. They have one. I was telling you, it's like the Spider-Man 2, it's J.K. Simmons. He's like, I want Spider-Man. And then the newspaper hits the screen. It just says Steam Deck, It's cool shit like that. I had one, I had a closing one that was just the ending of Saw 1. And it's just him shutting the door and saying game over. I'm like, this is perfect, So I agree with you. There's a ton of really cool shit that you can do with the Steam Deck. And I'm really happy that I have one.
Yeah, I've really debated because I had an opportunity at one point to potentially get Saws and it hasn't come back up, but I really get this feeling that if I were to buy it, I would give it like 2 weeks of pretty dedicated fucking around with it. And then I just really wouldn't have the time for it. And a lot of that comes into even though I'm supposed to be like, I don't know if I'm trying to come off of being so busy that my body just doesn't understand what to do. Even though this week I've not been working every day after work like I was, I feel like the only thing I've done is play Cult of the Lamb. And I don't know if it's just like I'm still playing almost entirely on the Portal. I finally didn't do that whenever I started Astrobot because I wanted to, see it all in the glory on my 4K TV OLED. And, so I don't know. I think I'm just kind of stuck in a strangle pattern of it's probably that I was playing Cult of the Lamb while I was doing that. So my body is just like defaulting back to it. But I don't feel like I've stepped out of that yet, which is unfortunate. So I really want to get done with Cult of the Lamb so that I can see if Astrobot and Black Myth and all these other games that are coming start to kind of pull me and I start to feel more connected to games this year than I really have up until this point. But with that in mind, Steam Deck, I feel like would only just distract me from being more engaged with what's happening now and the things I've missed up until now this year that I've not really put enough time into. So I think maybe you're in a better spot for it than I am, but I only have so much time. And ultimately, I end up liking the Portal as my handheld of choice, even though it's not quite.
I think the thing there, I would say, is that you can... with a little bit of effort, you can put, remote play on there. So I almost think it's kind of the perfect handheld for you where it's like, okay, I'm going to throw the remote play app on here and some emulators. And then, I'll play Balatro. You know what I mean? So it does seem like a good, but it's one of these things it's completely non-essential, but like using it has been like, okay, this is great.
Yeah, for sure. And I think really, speaking more on the Steam Deck, I think its biggest point of, I guess the biggest points I'll throw toward it is I think it's made PC gaming far more accessible than it was.
Definitely.
And I think that that's good. And I keep saying that I want to see Steam essentially go back to what it was doing previously, way back in like 2014 when they attempted to do Steam machines. And I want to see them reapproach this. And instead of going on to other manufacturers like Alienware and whatnot and trying to get them to do it, do the same thing. It's one box that you manufacture, that you price, you determine what it is. It's the same as Steam Decks. It's built on Linux. It uses was it Proton? Isn't that what the thing that Steam Deck uses? It uses that library so that you can hyper make sure that these games run well and convert over so that you can kind of get the best out of it and just throw it out there and see what it would do. And I think in this landscape, it would do so much better than Steam machines did. And I think Steam Deck helps that because all you got to do is go, it's a Steam Deck with more power that's on your TV. All of the complex parts of owning a computer are gone. Yeah. It's done for you, and this will last because it's scalable. This will last for a good time to where, for the most part, you'll be able to play almost every AAA game for a while. And then it's cool, too, because, right, they might be able to get a pretty good price on this while still getting decent performance because they're taking out the need for a battery, the need for a screen. All of that stuff goes away. And so now you can focus on putting the money that went towards all those things back into just power because you know this thing's plugged in and has a controller. And I think that'd be really cool. So we'll see what happens in the PC space, and we might have to see what happens in the PC space if you believe all the online rumblings that are happening because of some news that hit today. But before we get there,
the last thing I'll say, which I thought was a really cool use of it, I went to a bachelor party last weekend in Vermont. Great time, and we hooked it up to the TV, and we were able to play Super Smash Brothers through my Steam Deck on the TV with 4 DualSense controllers.
Hell yeah!
So that was pretty lit. That was a
which
weird...
which Smash Bros were you playing? Melee.
Yeah,
sounds right. Yeah, that's obvious. Pretty cool. Yeah, no, it's interesting seeing people play like Breath of the Wild's Wii version on there at like 90 frames per second.
I was playing Wind Waker on Wii U. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. So the next piece of news that we're going to go up to, I think, is an interesting one, and I think it speaks a lot to what is kind of going on and what hardware is doing and how that success is kind of looked at and figured out. And so the first one that we're going to cover here is PlayStation Portal has been consistently viewed as a huge success for PlayStation. Mm-hmm. And yet we haven't really gotten a good idea on how many of them have sold, other than way more than Sony thought would be the case, and that they had to ramp up production and stuff for this. And I think you start to get an insight for how PlayStation prepares a product, how they plan for a product, and then secondarily, what happens when that product actually does way better than intended. So this is something really worth noting. So PlayStation, this is over on Twisted Voxel. It says PlayStation Portal, the PS5's handheld accessory, has become a major success for Sony Interactive Entertainment with nearly 500,000 sales. And what I want to throw out there is that PlayStation 5 has got like 60 plus million units out in the wild. Mm-hmm. And that means that if you look at PlayStation Portal as something that Sony would hope to be as widespread as they can, that is like 1% of the PlayStation market. And yet this thing is being considered a very big success and is being hinted at from people who are really reliable as being something that's making Sony reconsider the actual handheld market. And I think what's important here, there's a couple things. I want to read the rest of it. So according to Circana Retail Tracking Service, PlayStation Portal sales are currently between 420,000 and 630,000 units in the United States since launch in November. So that's important. This does not indicate that this is worldwide, but at least in the U.S., which I'm going to assume the U.S. and like Europe are probably, and probably more like specifically the U.K., are going to be more of the primary areas for this, primarily because of how internet focused they are, though I'd love to be proven wrong. So the PS5's handheld accessory has been a major success for Sony, providing an encouraging lift to the game accessories market. Now, what I think is interesting here is 500,000 is a rousing success for this piece of kit. That really doesn't take a whole lot, right? If you actually look at what it is, it's essentially a DualSense with a screen put in it. The screen looks great. It's a really nice looking screen. When everything's loading like it's supposed to, it's crisp, it's colorful, even though it's an LCD or, instead of an LED instead of an OLED. Still has pretty great contrast ratio. Games look really good on it. Definitely indie games where the level of detail is not necessarily as apparent as it would be with a big 4K. Like, I don't know if I'd want to play Spider-Man 2 on this, but still, it's an impressive thing to see. It's just really weird to see that low of a saturation and yet it be considered this big of a success when we can look at the fact that PSVR 2 sold like at least 2 million units and has vastly been viewed as a failure. And I think it goes into what did Sony prepare, what is the cost behind these, and what is the markup. And I think the big thing here is this has got to be a cheap piece of kit to make with a high markup. And even after the companies take their profit, it's got to be something that, they're making quite a bit of money on in order for this to be a success. I don't know. You have any thoughts here, Chris? This is more of just a curiosity that we finally have somewhat of a number to throw to this success that I expected it to be larger for some reason. Even a million would have been like, oh, damn, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not entirely sure because I think in the end, I'm trying to think of the best way to say what I'm thinking. Oh, yeah. I don't think that Sony didn't know what they had. I don't think this is a Concord situation. I think they knew that this was a piece of very specific kit. And so to me, 500,000 does seem pretty good,
Yeah.
And that's so I think if I'm looking at this going, hey, this might sell 0 units because it's so niche and it really doesn't do look, I love the Portal, but it doesn't do anything.
No. Or rather, without a PlayStation 5, it's literally pointless. That's the best way to point it. Yeah, right. Like
right.
It solely requires you to have a PS5 and robust enough internet.
Yeah, like if this was the Steam Deck, if it was a PS thing, and it sold 500,000, that would be a resounding company potentially ruining failure. But that's a fucking LCD screen and a cut in half DualSense. It cost them $20, to make. So, hey, it's Chris, a test bed. It's, hey, do people want to buy this stuff?
You're right. And it is a test bed that clearly the market for streaming games in a half step sense, right? I want to call it, this is half measure streaming. And what I like about it is it really does solve most of the problems that traditional game streaming has. Traditional game streaming, it's all about how close to the actual device that's doing the work for you. So how close are you to the data center? And that's going to determine vastly on how good the quality of it is for you. Well, the data center here is your home. So if you're streaming from home, you kind of have an idea on what to expect. And so I view it as a half measure for streaming where people still want to have the console and be able to play it without streaming. But in extenuating circumstances, they want the streaming to be around and it's good enough to act as a cheap way to still interact with game streaming. So I think Sony was surprised because I don't know. It seems like they don't put a lot of... their game streaming on PS Plus doesn't seem to matter to them that much, and they don't seem to put a lot of hope behind it as something that's moving the market right now. And I think that can be seen in the fact that the Portal cannot stream from PS Plus. It can only stream from your PlayStation. And so I think it's a really interesting thing there. But part of the thing going towards cost on this is, Chris, if we're to believe, DualSense has gone up by $5 because PlayStation and retailers have increased the DualSense price by $5. So it's no longer $70. It is now, or $69.99. Now it is $74.99. So, and this is after it increased in Japan, and now it's increasing in the US as well. So yeah, I agree with you. This is probably cheap tech to make, but it still makes me wonder, how much is a screen? How much is a battery? How much is, it's Android, so it's probably not much on that regard of spending, but I do wonder how much this costs to make. And then secondarily, what they really expected out of it. And the reason I bring up what they expected out of it is that the real topic of today, that's going to be the thing we end up talking about the most, and I think is the most heated thing happening right now, is the PlayStation 5 Pro, its price, and people's thought process as to how Sony thinks it's going to perform at that price. And I'm kind of using all of this as an example to show that Sony is not afraid to put out a product that they see a market for, as long as they know that they have priced the object to do well enough in the market that they are trying to hit, and the fragment of the market that they're trying to hit, and that they are projecting correctly. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is going to be a really big talk into what PS5 Pro is, why it chose to go this route, how it differs from PS4 Pro, and why the price is less of a factor than I think most people are really considering for the market that Sony's actually trying to hit here. So, Chris, I mean, without further ado, I'm pretty ready to break into this if you are.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Here we are. Today, Mark Cerny hosted a PlayStation tech video going over the PlayStation 5 Pro, which has long been, talked about, rumored. We've known a lot of the information to some degree if you've been looking, and it looks like pretty much everything that was said is true. The only thing we didn't know is how does it actually impact the games, what games are going to use this, so on and so forth. So today we got the breakdown, and they looked at 3 key areas that they thought were important: upgraded GPU, advanced ray tracing, and then AI-driven upscaling. Those are the 3 marks that they wanted to improve upon and build upon the PlayStation 5. And we got all of this talk, look at the games, what the goal is. Stated simply, the goal is to give fidelity quality with the frame rates you'd expect from a performance mode. That is the primary goal that they're going for with this. And lastly, we learned that the device will be releasing in November, on November 7th in particular, at a cost of $699 USD and 699 British pounds. Good Lord, why can I not say that? 799.99 euros and 119,980 yen. So let's go through here. This is important to know. This new system comes with 2 terabytes SSD, which is over the standard 680 gigs that we get with the standard PS5. Back me up in case I'm wrong, Chris. Does the PS5 Slim still come with that, or does the PS5 Slim do a terabyte?
It's still a terabyte. No.
Oh, it's a terabyte? Because remember, launch PlayStation 5s are 680 gigs.
Well, yeah, but it's a terabyte with all the stuff on it.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's a terabyte drive with the gigs off, no?
No. No. The launch unit was like 700 gigs essentially, with the OS and stuff putting you down to like 600 something that you could use. Now, the Series X was a terabyte.
825 gigabytes was the launch, yeah.
There you go. And I think your effective memory rate is 680, something like that, after the OS and everything on it. Yeah. All right. So we're going up to a 2 terabyte, probably around the same thing, 1.8 terabytes of usable memory. So you'll still get a controller, and you'll get a copy of Astro's Playroom pre-installed just like beforehand. And it's a diskless console with the option to purchase currently available disk drive that is sold for the PS5 Slim separately. All of the plates for PS5 and all those accessories will work for the PS5 Pro as we intended. So first thing I want to go through, Chris, did you watch the event?
I did.
Okay. I want to talk about the event, because while I think it's really easy to get lost in everything else that's going, I think that there's a lot to be said about Sony's intended audience for this, Sony's marketing of this so far. And I think that they did a much better job with this than they did with the PS4 Pro for one simple reason. PS4 Pro seemed like they were trying to tell you that your PS4 was pointless now. They didn't really mean that, but it felt far more that way. And that was because you had the jump. Hey, 4K TVs are a thing now. We're showing you that 4K is what you want. This is the thing that can do it, and all these other improvements, right? But they're also kind of doing it in this weird way where it's like, but we're also doing it at the same price as PS4 was day one. Okay. And I don't know if you remember that tech thing. It was like 40 minutes for the PS4 Pro. I think the PS5 Pro was short, sweet, simple, 10 minutes. And I think that they did a really good job of two things: briefly explaining how it was better, while understanding that the ways that you can see it's going to be better is going to be very difficult to show in a video. Okay. Two, they were very particular with the structure of this to have Mark Cerny start the conversation by talking about the PS5 and all of the things that it still does great and what they were aiming for with it. And what I think is very dominant to me throughout this is that this goes to show that this is not for people who are happy with their PS5 and do not feel like they want anything extra. This is not about replacing the PS5. This is about looking to a specific group of the market, both from a consumer side and the developer side, and saying, for the small percentage of you who really want to push what you can do on the console side, this is the device for you. And one of the reasons I think this is important, PS4 Pro felt like they wanted to act like it was this big of a, hey, we're trying to really show what the people who care about graphics and frame rate and all that, when really it was just about getting the 4K at any means necessary. I kind of appreciate the fact that this feels more like, if you are someone who really cares about these aspects, you understand that they are not easy to get. They come with a price, and we are really looking at the enthusiast side of the market, and we're going to charge for it because we have all the hardware needed to make that happen. And it's completely unnecessary, and you're still going to get great PS5 games until the PS6 comes out. Do you think you agree with that? And if not, what was your take on the presentation?
Honestly, my take on the presentation was that I was not the target audience. It's kind of, I feel like that was kind of what you were saying, right? Where this was speaking to someone like, I don't know, Moore's Law is dead, right? Like someone like that who knows what Mark Cerny is saying. Basically what I took from it was, if you play, you'll get basically performance and fidelity mode all at the same time. That was my biggest takeaway. And then obviously the price stuff. So to me, I looked at this console, I went, yeah, this seems like exactly what I thought it was going to be. And it was one of those things where I watched it and I was like, it was cool to watch. I didn't need to watch it, because a lot of the stuff Mark Cerny was saying, I felt like he was talking to devs and he was talking to people who like really know their shit. And that's not me,
Yeah.
So,
and I agree with you. And all I'll say is doing that in 10 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes is a much smarter choice, because I think that they're aware of the fact that even people who don't care about the techno babble are going to watch this. And so while there's some techno babble in there, and there definitely is, he made it a point to constantly go back to something simple. Bigger GPU. If you even are remotely an enthusiast of games, you know what a GPU is. Even if you don't understand exactly how they work, you understand that they are the things that give you graphics. Therefore, bigger GPU, more graphics.
Yeah. Well, and even that was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I assume that means what you're saying it means, but my dad's got a bigger car than me, and we can still both go to the same place. So
yeah, 100%, right?
So it was something,
and that's a good way to look at this. This is a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that may be a bit of too much of a jump, but this is a GTR.
I don't think it is.
Right. This is a Nissan GTR, and the PS5 is a Maxima.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool. Yeah, we're on the same page. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I thought it was really smart to be more concise on the three areas that you were going to, and then kind of hammer them home again and again and again without becoming off. It almost felt like when people write a good speech in like a movie, and it's about like, we're going to start, we're going to highlight the things we want, and then we're going to bounce back to them as a reminder of these are the things we're trying to achieve. And it was really well done, because I think even people who don't know much, he constantly tied back to what you should expect. And I like how the terms were a lot simpler. It wasn't getting lost in how this is doing checkerboard rendering and look at how it takes this and multiplies it out. It still showed a lot of that, but it did it really quickly, and he didn't really spend time on it. He was just like, hey, all this does is takes the image, fills in the space in between with some super sampling from AI learning. Bam, that was it. And he was just like, look at what it looks like. And then it was more clear language, it's smoother while keeping all the graphical effects that you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Bam. And I don't know, there was something simplistic about it in the best way, to where it's like, yes, the technobabble was there for the people that want it, but now what it really is about is giving you an idea of what you should expect, and then hoping that you're going to go to the people that you trust and have them who have gone hands-on with it say, this is what I noticed. This was the difference. I felt the difference. I saw the difference. I can understand the need for the difference. And then if that checks all those boxes for you and you have the money and you want that experience, you'll go and get it.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about the price?
I do, Chris. I do.
Because this is where I did all my research. I don't even know if I needed it anymore.
What I want to do from the get-go is want to give a piece of context that was interesting that came around right in time for this to be happening. So Xbox announced that they have a Series X console with a 2 terabyte hard drive in it that is $600. So I think it's really a great point to start with that, and to also start and look at the fact that the controller prices have gone up. And I want to lay a foundation where we can talk about the fact that while price is in a rough spot, and I agree that it's in a rough spot, but I don't think it's in a rough spot for the reason that people seem to be thinking. I know some people just get upset and they start being a little irrational, but let's really look at what's going on. Multiple countries' economies are in a really rough spot. The values of their respective currencies have gone down. Therefore, the purchasing power of that money has gone down. And so the equivalent purchasing dollars that you would have had to spend goes up for things like this. That's important to note, right? The $5 price increase on the controller is less indicative of the fact that they're having to pay more for parts or anything like that. That is probably partially in there because of the economy being in a weird spot. But it's also to acknowledge the fact that this $70 price point for the controller, if you account for the inflation that's happened, is no longer anywhere near, and they're adjusting that $5 so that they're closer back to the original margins they had for the controller. So if we can start from the bed of understanding where we're at, understanding where value is, and then looking at the fact that this generation has clearly been different than every other generation, and the fact that typically, both for the PS3, PS2, all of these, right? But let's look at PS3 and PS4 specifically, because they had internal storage. The general rule of thumb is that as the generation went on, the price of the box went down while the amount of storage went up.
Mm-hmm.
We have not seen that this generation at all. So, Chris, go ahead with all your research and pitch me your take on what's happening in the price here.
I will. This is how I will pitch my take. So I looked up a bunch of games. So to run Ratchet and Clank at 1440/60 on PC would require a 3070, which retails for $439, and it requires an i5 CPU, which retails for $175. Brett, can you do some quick math on what that means? That means 2 of the parts that you need to build a PC to run. Now, I want to make something very clear about the figures I'm about to present. All of these are not even matching the PS5 Pro, because I gave a little bit of leeway. I gave some, a little help to the argument, and I decided to go with high instead of ultra. Now, purportedly, the PS5 will run games at 4K 60, which would be ultra for all of these games. This is 1440/60.
Well, let's take a second, right? Because this is where, and I want to be specific for anybody who does know their PC stuff. Yes and no. The PS5 Pro will run certain games at a native 4K and probably a 60, right? There are games that already do that. If you look at Gran Turismo 7, it runs at 4K 60. But there's something important to throw in here. A lot of games run at a sub 4K resolution with some kind of scaling, or the worst examples, like Immortals of Avium and games that are made on stuff like that, is FSR. And that is AMD's, essentially it's Fidelity Super Resolution or whatever, I think is what it stands for. And it's It's all sorts of like, reconstruction, trying to scale the image up and give it extra quality. It ends up giving you fuzzy edges and all that stuff. So it's really important to note that on the PS5 Pro, and this is cool because you've pulled in a card that is a 3070. It's an RTX card and it has DLSS support. Mm-hmm. And the reason that that's really important to note is that DLSS is the NVIDIA equivalent to what PlayStation is doing and AMD does not have otherwise outside of PlayStation, and that is that PSSR. It is a piece of hardware on the motherboard that is taking in the scene and then doing the work to recreate the rest. Mm-hmm. It is extra hardware. This cannot be done without this hardware. It is why AMD cards cannot use DLSS on a computer. That's important because with DLSS, you never run the games at native resolution. The point is that you can run the games at a lower internal resolution. DLSS will do the work to lift it back to where it looks almost identical to a native 4K, but you get a lot of performance boost everywhere. So continue from there.
The only thing I'll say to that is that, as we'll see when we go through the games, they're all going to run at 4K 60 on PS5 Pro. Horizon, Forbidden West, 1440 60, 3070, $439. i7, 9700, $300. Brett, what's the total price on two items?
Hey, look at that. It's around $700.
It's $739 exactly.
Yeah.
You also need 16 gigabytes of RAM, $46.99. God of War Ragnarok, exactly the same. Spider-Man Remastered, same as Horizon for 4K 60. It's pretty cheap for 1080p. I didn't bother to do this because it's significantly lower. But if you want 4K 60, you got to pay the $739 like you do with Horizon. Ghost of Tsushima requires a 3070, 1440p, 60, a 3070 for $439, and a higher end i5 that is about $175. Now, the big kicker, Concord requires a 3080 for $736 and an i70 1070K for $339 to run at 1440 60. So, Brett, can I please have a sum total of 736 plus 339? I don't need you to do it. That's $1,074. So what the fuck are we talking about here?
Yeah.
$700 to get the performance that you would have to get on a PC costs it's a better deal to buy the PS5.
Well,
this is not included.
And now
hold on, I can't.
This
hear you.
is go ahead.
You're gonna have to take a second.
Chris's ears fail.
Speak.
Hey there, what's up, buddy?
I can't hear you.
Okay, well, great. Well, I'm gonna take over for a second while Chris figures this thing out.
You're good.
All right. So, finish your point off because there's you're circling around something that's real important to me in particular.
Go ahead.
Okay. Now we get to the meat of it. I've seen a lot of people today, and I want to first stress that I understand and I support the choice. For everyone who's looking at this and they're thinking the price is a problem, first and foremost, this is not replacing the PS5. This is not for the average console consumer. This is for people who like the idea of how computers can help push and give you an even better graphical fidelity and performance, but they don't want to deal with the nature of what PC sometimes means, which is upgrading components, having to deal with making sure that you have drivers that are updated constantly and that don't automatically happen for you, right? This is about going, and some of them do, I want to throw that out there, but the point being is PC gaming is inherently less plug and play. You have to know more, you have to pay more attention, and you have to go in and fine tune the experience in the menu settings to say, well, to get the 1440p 60 frames per second that I want, I'm willing to turn shadow quality down, texture quality down, but I want to make sure that my lighting stays where it's at. So I'm going to leave that there. Then I'm going to go with it. And so what it becomes is a nature of fine tuning. And it's great that you can do that. And PC is an absolutely killer place to be if you want that level of control to get the exact image you want. But do you know what consoles are for? They are to get close to that. They're to give you a mimicked feel of, wow, I'm getting a very high-end experience at a fraction of the cost and with none of the work needed to optimize the game because it's been optimized for discrete, specific hardware. And I think that that's really important to go through because PCs are a variable. Chris goes through and he's telling you these are what you need for recommendations. You don't have to have those, right? You can get 1440p 60 frames per second on a 30. This is Helldivers 2. It recommends a 3070 and an i5 12600K. So these are exactly in line with what you were talking about from most of those other games, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about around $500 to $600 worth of just graphics card and CPU. We haven't pulled in a power supply. We haven't pulled in a motherboard. We haven't pulled in a cooler. We haven't pulled in any of the other rest of the components that are going to be there. We haven't talked about RAM. This
monitor,
is all there.
Keyboard, internet.
Yes. Now monitor and keyboard. I think you have a fair argument with keyboard and mouse. Monitor, no, in my opinion, because that's like saying that you have to include the price of your TV into the console. I don't think that's fair. But the keyboard and mouse is essentially the controller, so you need to account for those, right? That's a good point. All right. So when you look at all this, I do think it's important to say that, yes, on PC, because of its nature, you can take a game like Helldivers 2 and you can still get 1440p 60 by going in and saying, I have a 3060 Ti, which is not quite a 3070 or a 3060. I have a normal 3060, but I'm willing to give up shadow quality a little bit to help me hit the frame rate target that I want. Cool. It's great that you can do that. Does every person want to do that? No. Is there a fragment of the market that wants that and is willing to pay a premium for hardware that will do that for them and really do it for them without even sacrificing the shadow quality, instead just pumping everything up from what they're used to? Yes. And so where I want to go at here, $700 is expensive. $700 with no disk drive is expensive. And I do think that there's something to be said that if you are someone who cares about cutting edge technology, I do think there's a decent chance that you care about physical media and therefore will want a disk drive. It is great that there's an option for you to do that if you want that. If you are upgrading from a PS5 Slim, great. You can use that disk drive on the PS5 Pro. You don't have to do anything extra. So think about all this, look at it, and realize that this is expensive. This might be a good thing to look at and go, this is indicative of what I should expect from a PS6, or at least that $600 in the future is going to be there. But at the end of the day, understand this is a premium piece of tech in an already luxury-driven industry that is completely unnecessary, and Sony does not care if you get it or not. We talked a while back about how the PS4 Pro, something that did a far less jump in quality from everything we can see, still only had about 20% of the actual PlayStation 4 sales amount. Mm-hmm. I want to throw out there and say, I was a little worried that the PS5 Pro might just be what the PS4 Pro was, and it really wasn't going to be much of a jump. I'm actually kind of glad to see them double down and go, no, we're really going to shoot for the stars, and people who want cutting edge graphics and cutting edge things, we're going to provide to them. It's a deeper niche, but I think it's a more rewarding one. And I'm curious to see how this plays off for them. And I'm not even saying that it'll hit 20%, but I don't think that they care. I do think that there's something to be said here. Look at the Portal. I think that they are pricing this to what they think is reasonable and what they can return. And they are expecting it to sell a certain percentage of the market price on here.
Would you repeat your last sentence, please? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Well, it's fine. I need to actually clarify it anyway. So they are looking at, they're making as many, and they're pricing it and making as many as they think that they can sell through, and at a rate where they're not losing money. I don't think that this particular device needs to be subsidized. I'm going to be 100% there. This is a completely unnecessary thing that only people who want PS5 but want the cutting edge are going to get. And I don't think it's unreasonable to tell them to pay for it.
No. And that's the thing. The conversation around PS5 Pro has been incredibly fucking disingenuous. because the conversation acts like they took the regular PS5 and shot it in the head, and this is the only option you have.
Or something that you noted earlier, and I think this is a really important thing. People have been talking about how this is a response of Sony having no competitor because of Microsoft really falling behind this generation in terms of competing in the console sales territory. And this is also people looking at the fact that most of Microsoft's games seem like they're probably going to start coming to PlayStation. So they start looking at Microsoft as less of a competitor. And whether or not that's true, I think doesn't matter to the price of the PS5 Pro. But Chris said something earlier when someone put a tweet that was like that in their Discord of, if we were in a world where Sony took the base PS5 that's been the same price since launch for the most part. In certain markets where inflation has really hit hard, they have adjusted the price, like in Japan. But in the United States, the PS5 is the same price as it's been since launch. Okay. So important to note, they didn't go and say, hey, PS5 $600 now, and the Pro's $700. That's not what they did. They did not touch the pricing of their flagship. Flagship's a rough word, because I think PS5 Pro will be flagship for them. Sure. But it is not the product they care. It's not their hinged product. The product that all of their business for PlayStation hinges on is the PS5.
Yeah, it's like Ford will sell you a Raptor, but they'll also sell you a Focus. And
they sell way more Focuses than they sell Raptors.
Exactly.
And they know that. And that's why, dude, I'm so glad you brought that up, Chris. I have a Ford Bronco.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It was $50,000. They're expensive. They already are. They are. Right? So, and look, I love this because this is, think 5,000, 50,000. All right. Yeah. The Raptor, they started about 79,000. Most of them are in the $90,000 range. And guess what? Everything that's added on to them is completely unnecessary. And you still get a Bronco even if you buy the base model for $39,000. You know, it's like everything else that I'm getting is I wanted dual air control. I wanted dual seat heaters. I wanted a 110 volt outlet plug in the back for my daughter. These are all things I paid more for. I wanted vinyl seats. I wanted drain plugs and a rubber floor so that I could just spray my car out. I paid extra money for all of those things because I wanted a more premium experience. I don't think Sony offering this option is that crazy. But I want to, again, throw out there, I get that $700 is a lot. I get that there's a sticker shock to that. But I think ask yourself a real question. Do you even want to buy this? What price point would this thing or do you even have interest in what it's offering? And I think naturally speaking, right? If someone could get this for $500, they'd probably be like, yeah, even if they didn't care much, because it's like, why not have more power? But really ask yourself, take price away from it for a second. Just know that it's going to be more than a PS5. Do you even want this?
Right.
If you don't, then why does it matter? If you do, then what is the price point in which it becomes something that you don't think that you can justify? Cool. You're not wrong for not wanting it. You're not even really wrong for complaining. What I think is interesting is people who aren't saying this is too rich for my blood, I don't want it, and instead saying this is a crazy price, how dare Sony price it this way? No, Sony priced it in a completely reasonable way, in my opinion. Like Chris was talking about, if you were to look and see if you could try and get similar things, if you were to look at what a 3080 cost, and then you look at just generally speaking, you know, let's do it real quick. RTX 3080. Okay. So we have a 3080. This is the EVGA. I don't want to go off of that. Let's look up an actual NVIDIA one so that I'm not bringing it up to any other manufacturers. Okay. So a 3080 Ti Founders Edition is $1,095. Jesus Christ. A normal 3080 Ti is $899. A 3080 used is $400. Brand new, $800. Okay. Do we see how just a graphics card is more than the price of the PS5 Pro? And that's because I'll tell you, this is a device I'm very likely to get. I have a TV that is 4K, that is OLED, that can support higher frame rates, can support variable refresh rate. I can see the benefits from this more so than a lot of people. This is more up my alley. I like extra power. I don't like having to come home and sit on a computer when I do it all day at work. This is a device for someone like me who wants the best of both worlds. I'm trying to Hannah Montana this shit. $700, and then I'm going to get a disk drive. I know I will. So $800. Okay. Yes, it's high. You are not wrong. But this is aimed at people like me who have the income and the interest and those two things combined. You're not wrong for not wanting it.
The biggest takeaway that I have from this whole thing is that people are not upset at the price. They're upset that they can't afford it. And I'm not trying to like be an asshole or, make anyone feel lesser than, because I can't really afford it. But that's the thing, right? It's like you've been saying, and like we've both been saying, this is not for you. The PS5 works perfectly well, right? So for me, this is one of those things where people were like, oh, hell yeah, the PS5 Pro is coming out. I can't wait to get one. And then it's out of their price range, so now the price is too high. But Apple just announced a $1,500 phone.
Look, and I'll throw it out there, 100% fair, Chris. Like what you just said is true. They want it. It's out of their price range. Ergo, the price is too high. Yeah, that's a factual statement. And I know where you're getting at.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that's what it is.
Right.
That's like going, well, I'd really like the new iPhone, but I don't want to spend $1,400, or I don't want to add $50 a month to my phone bill. Therefore, I'm not going to get it. All right. At what price point or which submodel of the iPhone do you want? Because you can also get the base model iPhone 15 or 16 or whatever it is, right? It's $800.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can get the $1,500 one. Is the $1,500 one priced too high? Yeah, of course. It's priced too high for me because I don't like Apple. That's strong. I don't use Apple. I don't have any interest in that ecosystem. And I definitely don't have interest in spending over $1,000 on a phone. Right? I use a Google Pixel Pro. They're always $999. It literally is. I will not buy a phone that's over $1,000 until inflation gets so bad that there's just not a lot of options that do so. So yeah, with that in mind, everything is a matter of what do you want? How much are you willing to pay for it? And there's a gradient for that. Right? If you want to play next gen games, but you don't want to spend a lot of money, Xbox Series S is the machine for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to spend a middle amount of money and you're not worried about physical disc and you want to play better looking next gen or, current gen games, PS4 or PS5 Slim Digital is the system for you. If you want to be able to also use it as a 4K Blu-ray player and play some of your physical games for whatever reason, because you game share with a friend, cool. $500, the normal PS5 is a system for you, or maybe the Xbox Series X is a system for you. If you want 4K or something that you can't tell is not 4K at 60 frames per second, guess what's for you? The PS5 Pro. Yep. If you want to spend that money. I don't know. I know that this is going to be one of those things where someone's like, what do you mean it's not too high? And I think this is so weird because I've seen... again, no one's wrong necessarily, but I think reframe your mind for a second, because I've seen people saying that this is the pro can't stand for pro consumer. What part of a pro moniker on a piece of kit makes you think it's for an average consumer? The PS5 digital is the consumer pro model. That is the model that is the most bang for the cheapest amount of money. Yep. Why would the PS5 Pro be the consumer-friendly model?
Mm-hmm.
What are you even talking about? And at that point, I do buy into what you're saying. They're upset because everyone likes the idea of more power. They suddenly feel like when the PS5 Pro comes out, their PS5 will be rendered no longer the strongest machine, which is already not the case if you look at paper, right? I mean, the Xbox Series X is technically more powerful than the PS5, even though it doesn't always show that way. But point being, now they feel like their PlayStation 5 is invalidated because something's out there that is better. That's the Google Pixel 9 just came out. I'm not suddenly upset that my Pixel 8 Pro is still what I'm rocking. This is a good phone. It doesn't have any problems. Does exactly what I want it to. And I'm not ready to spend money on a Pixel 9 Pro. I'll wait until the Pixel 10. It's pretty much how I rock. Every 2 years, I get a new phone. And I don't even have to do that, right? My work phone, I've had the same work phone. It's the Pixel 6. Okay, cool. Yeah. Right? Just hold on to stuff. So I don't know. This one strikes me as, I think the bigger conversation I have here is that people are unwilling or just don't understand the full impact of inflation. That's the first thing to really consider. And then secondarily, it's like they just don't want to look at the gradient that happens here and the fact that this is a completely unnecessary, super high-end thing that's not meant for even close to anybody. But I think the worry comes from a far more reasonable question, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, right? Is a lot of people think that this is testing grounds for what next-gen consoles are going to cost whenever we come around to our PlayStation 6s. And if there's a secondary question that's tied into this that I'm kind of curious to hear you out on as well. And I guess, do you think $700 is the PS6 baseline price point just because of the Pro?
No.
Yeah. So why is that?
We just had a 20-minute conversation on why.
Look at that. So let me give you a quick gut punch, because right, we can reference this at any point. There's two questions wrapped up in this. First of all, is when should we even expect a PS6? Secondarily, and based on the economy, that will change considerably as to what the price of the PS6 is. But if you were to account for inflation, what would you consider in today's dollars that you'd be expecting to pay when the PS6 does eventually hit?
$499.
Yeah. I'm very much in the same boat as you. I think that the ideal, if the economy doesn't slip too much further, would be to look at and say, okay, $500 is the new standard of what we want the systems to hit if we can keep it.
Well, the thing is, I don't even think it matters if the economy goes bad, because you'll see that in the actual game prices. I could see games going up to 80, 85.
Sure.
But I don't, the console will, I could be wrong, but I don't believe the console will ever go beyond 500 for the base entry level model. Because as we just talked about, and as everyone who's listening to this and even thinks about that question inherently knows, $700 is too much money for the average person to spend on a video game console. So Sony is not going to launch. Like, that's the thing about the Xbox thing and all of this, right? Sony's not going to walk in here like Mr. fucking Burns, like, yes, we can raise the prices and nobody will buy it. You know, nobody will complain. They still have to sell the fucking thing.
Yeah.
That's why this doesn't make any fucking sense, dude. They make their money on games. PS5 Pro is a very specific different thing, because I am sure they are profiting on the PS5 Pro, because they do not give a fuck if someone who can't afford it is not going to buy it, as we've just discussed. All of this is just incredibly short-sighted. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for Sony to go, oh, we killed Microsoft, so now we can charge $2,000 for a console, because nobody will buy it. And then guess what happens? Microsoft goes, hey, guess we got our opening. That's not how this works. That is, look, I'm sorry. The harsh reality that people have to face is that you are not CEO of PlayStation because you're not thinking about the next 10, 15 years. You're not in Herman Hulst's position because you think a console for the high-end people is determining what everyone's paying. Yeah, I don't mean to be harsh, but people have to think logically. And there is no logic to Sony pricing themselves out of the market.
Which would only happen on their baseline model.
Exactly.
Right? And that goes back to saying, right, if PS4, if the PS5 digital was announced today to be $500 and the PS5 disc went up to $600, and then they announced the PS5 Pro for $700, A, that contextually makes the Pro look way better. B, it does make you go, oh, they're just doing this because there's nobody else in the market that can go against them. But I agree with you. What would even be their motivation to do that? They've tried that once. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they can't. They absolutely can. They tried that once. They did it with the PS3. The PS3 was a monstrous amount of money in concurrent. Like, if you looked at what the purchasing power of that dollar was at that age, it's insane. But let's, something to look for people who are like, inflation is a BS crock. No. Right here for the US only, right? Let's look at specifically. We're not even talking about any of the other markets, and the yen is doing far worse. If we were to look at the $499 buying, if you were to buy a PS5 in 2020 at full price, that is the equivalent of $606 today, which contextually means that the PS5 Pro is $100 more than its PS5 counterpart was at the time of launch. If you were to look at purchasing power with that dollar. And I think it's all about context. If you realize what has happened to the economy for a number of different reasons, then I think it's a lot. Really, all I'm trying to say is, look, if $500 was still if $500 from 2020 was still the same amount of purchasing power today as it was then, and the PS5 Pro came out and was $600, do you think that it would be this reaction?
At $500?
At $600. So $100 more. So basically, the PS5 is still $500, but $500 is worth less now than it was in 2020, correct? So let's just say that inflation halted. It has not changed at all since 2020 to right now in 2024. And we were to go, okay, PS5 is still $500, but because the value of money hasn't changed at all, the equivalent price for what it would be the PS5 Pro would come in at $600. Do you think everybody would flip out? Or do you think they'd go, oh, contextually, that makes sense?
No, I think they would flip out.
You really think $100? Because the reason I bring that up is that going back to what the PS4 Pro even was, the PS4 Pro, when they announced it, they same time announced the PS4 Slim as well as the price reduction for the PS4. And the PS4 went from being $350 to $300, and the PS4 Pro was $400. It was a $100 price difference between the two. But the economy hadn't bounced around so much. So since they've had to kind of keep PS5 in the same spot, and if the dollar hadn't changed so much, you would actually be looking, and even if you look at now, there was an effective $100 price difference between the systems, accounting for inflation.
Yeah, I just think the thing is, I think anything more than $499 or whatever the PS5 costs, people were going to be mad. Because the reality is, if you listen to the fucking conversation, as far as I can tell, if you look on Twitter, the PS5 doesn't exist. We only have a PS5 Pro.
Yeah.
So,
well, Chris, let's pull in a quick question. This comes from listener RMG0731 over in our Discord. He asked, with PS5 Pro and price point, when do we see PlayStation 6 being? I see this being a very long generation with Sony showing PS4 games to showcase the power of the PS5 Pro. And of course, what they mean there is The Last of Us Part 2, which is a remaster, but it is worth noting that the original game it is pointing to is a very late PS4 game. He says, also, do you think we will ever hear about new games from Sony? So with all that in mind, let's kind of start there, Chris. We were talking about the PS6 price and what we think it might be. So for you right now, when do you think we'll see a PS6? And do you think it's anytime soon? Because if you think about PS4 Pro to when the PS4 came out, there was about a 4-year gap between the Pro's reveal and release and the PS5 release. Do you think we'll see a similar pattern, or do you think we see an elongated generation?
Okay. My hot take is that there will never be a next gen again. My hot take is that the PS6 will be the PS5 Pro. And that is my take on the PS5. The PS5 is the PS4 Pro. The PS5 Pro is the PS4 Pro. And it will continue on that way because these are all just half measures. So quite frankly, what I think is that if you're not in the position to buy every half measure like a cell phone, then you should skip this one, because in 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, the PS6 will be here. 2 to 3 years is my thought.
Man, I got to tell you, I vastly disagree with everything that you just said, except for maybe that we might see. Yeah, because
considering backwards compatibility, I can play everything.
I see your thing. I think I see your intuition, but what I think is a lot different, and this is something to note about why the prices stayed the same. PS4 came out at a time when everybody thought consoles were doomed and cell phones were going to completely ruin the gaming industry as we knew it, right? Matt Piscatella was like, why would you even bother? PS4 Pro, the PS4 is going to be a failure. Xbox One's going to be a failure. And then what happened? The PS4 became Sony's second best selling console of all time. But what's important to note there is at the time that the PlayStation 4 came out, tech-wise, PS4 was using very outdated parts. It was using Jaguar cores that were super outdated. They were mobile processors that were not made with any kind of gaming thought processes in mind. It was just a cheap way to get a system that was better than PS3, but also to hedge their bets, they made it to where they went x86, so it'd be easier to develop for and cheaper to make. So they wouldn't have to worry about having a PS3 level thing when gaming might be going away anyway, right? Or gaming as we knew it. So flash forward to 2020. The PS5, in comparison to what the tech was at the time of its release, the PS5 is a pretty tech-forward piece of kit. It's using modern architecture, modern processors, Zen 2, right? These are actively supported things in the PC sphere. They're more in line with what's happening on PC. And therefore, because of the fact that it was already more on the edge, it's been harder for it to lower in price, definitely as the economy and chip production and all these things have made it more difficult as well. So in my opinion, PS5 is quite a jump. Now, you do have a little bit of the diminished returns that happens, right, with the fact that visually you may not tell the same way, but moving to dedicated memory that is an SSD, fantastic. Moving to significantly more RAM, fantastic. Moving to CPUs that are not ancient and throttled because of the way that they were set up, huge benefit. Now, I can see the argument, and I agree with you. The PS5 Pro is a PS5 half measure. That's what it's supposed to be. I might see, depending on what they do, what you mean with the PS6. I just don't think that that's what a PS4 to PS5 was, nor do I even think it's what PS4 Pro to PS5 was. Now, timeline. I've had an intuition since the beginning of this generation that because of the slow adoption of systems in comparison to what they expected, in a large part because of COVID and having issues getting manufacturing to even meet the supply for a lot of these things, I've long thought that the fact that PS4 games or PS5 games were cross-gen for so long meant that they were going to push this generation. And since it's more tech-focused, the tech is more able to stretch the generation because it's not so far behind as PS4 was, or like Switch, right? Switch is pretty far behind. It really needs to be updated because it was using outdated tech at the time Switch came about. It was using like a 2014 processor that was already for a weak handheld. So when you look at all that going together, I'm curious as to what a PS6 is. I'm willing to say that we might not see a PS6 until 2030, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it in 2028, which would be that roughly same 8 years that we've always had. So that's my thought process there. But more importantly, do you think we'll ever see new games from Sony?
No, probably not.
There we go. Secondarily, this is an interesting one. Do you think PS5 Pro's price tag would have gone over better if Sony had a new game to show off on it instead of PS4 ports? I think a lot of people are putting way too much weight on the fact that The Last of Us 2 was shown. They showed so many other games, but the fact that any PS4 game was in there is a problem.
Honestly, I don't think they should have shown any games.
Yeah?
Yeah. I just think that was stupid. They should have... For me, if I'm Sony and I'm announcing this, again, I'm not the CEO. I just ranted about how none of us are. But I think logically, the way you do this and try and mitigate this is you do this technical test this week, and then next week there's a showcase that's showing the reasons to have the PS5 Pro. That I think is the most cogent argument against it, is that they showed this with The Last of Us Part 2.
Well, and to be, this is where curiosity, and I think I'll be able to better land on if I agree with your intuition and where it's at, because later this month, if we're still to believe the initial one, there's going to be a state of play that focuses more on what you're going to expect to see here. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a new game there as well. And that would actually, that might line up. Well, go ahead.
That should be all new games. If you show me a fucking PS5 Pro port of The Last of Us 2 at a fucking state of play, I legitimately might sell my PS5 and buy a PC.
Now, I agree with you on the sense of, with a state of play, if this is kind of why I think you should have shown games here, because with this thing you can reference old games and see and go, here's a visual difference to where you can freeze frame and see the increased fidelity, and then in motion you can see the increased performance with frame rate. Bam, you get what you need, right? But I agree with you. If they tried showing me Gran Turismo 7 with ray tracing, which is sick, by the way, ray tracing being in game instead of only in replays, awesome. Right? That's sick. I love that. But if you showed me that in a state of play, I'd be like, why? I agree. The state of play needs to be new games. And I actually kind of hope the state of play is their moment to be like, Ghost of Tsushima 2. Here we are. We're going to show you what PS4 Pro or what PS5 Pro has allowed us to do extra with this game. But we're also going to show you what PS5 has made us able to do with this engine in this series that we couldn't do on PS4.
I don't know. I think the problem with your thesis here is that I didn't see a difference.
Oh, and that's I noted up front. This is a really difficult thing to show, because what are you showing this on YouTube? A site known for the fact that it's got a really good compression, algorithm. But the problem with it is that when you're trying to show extreme detail, you're not going to catch that on a YouTube video. You would need original footage. You would need to be watching 4K footage on a 4K monitor with the ability to showcase the frame rate you're looking at. And you need to see that. If you watch this on a 480p YouTube video that doesn't even support the 60 frames per second, you literally see no difference. You have to bare minimum be watching at 720p 60 to see the fluidity difference. And then the only way you're going to see any kind of detail difference for the most part is going to be if you're watching at 1080p or 4K, ideally. And then it's still diminished because of the compression of YouTube. So this is an inherently hard thing to do. And I think the best thing they can do, and it looks like they have, as I've been kind of trying to keep up with the day, letting people that are known for their ability to look at these things and go, does this seem like it's worth it? Is it pushing the power? And let people like, Digital Foundry and John Linneman and people like that, let them get hands-on with it, and let people who trust them. And then John Linneman can go, it's great. This is what PSSR does. This is what the extra GPU does. This takes games with this problem and they're already fixed, and you can see it in motion in this demo. Sweet.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what's kind of fucking me up, is that, not fucking me up, it doesn't really matter to me, but I don't understand why Digital Foundry didn't have a video that went up at 11:15.
Yeah.
And then that's what's crazy, is like, they didn't. I had my head set on what this was going to be. I knew what was going to be here. There was no surprise. But they didn't prove it to me. I'm sorry, like the footage they showed meant nothing.
Yeah.
That meant nothing to me. Yeah, sure. I'm watching on my phone. I'm streaming through Wi-Fi. But like you said, that's their fucking problem. And
it is.
What they did was show me a side-by-side of The Last of Us, and it was literally the meme from The Office. Corporate wants you to find the difference between these two pictures. I couldn't fucking find it. So maybe had they done we're going to play Spider-Man 2. We're going to start on one end of New York, and we're going to swing across to the other one. Or we're going to start Spider-Man 2, and we're going to do the entire Sandman scene. And that's the last 15 minutes of the show. And that maybe showed the difference. But they showed me GIFs. And that did not sell it. So they should have had the Digital Foundry. That's why I think they shouldn't have had any games there, because they weren't willing to give it enough time to sink in. 5 seconds of rocks in The Last of Us doesn't sell me on the graphical difference. 20 minutes of a scene of The Last of Us 2 might have. But then again, I go back to the fact that you're trying to sell me a PS5 Pro for $700 on a game that, for all intents and purposes, I can get the same experience by buying a used PS4 for $100 and then spending $19 on a disc for The Last of Us Part 2. That's not a compelling reason to buy a console. So again, that's why I think they fucked up showing anything, because it's all old. Yes, I get like what you're saying with Gran Turismo. Great. Ratchet, whatever. It looked fine. Okay. But they're not doing what they should have done is go, hey, look, this is honestly, don't even show the games, but go, Final Fantasy Rebirth can't run 4K 60. Here it is in 4K 60 running on the PS5 Pro. It runs 4K 60 on the PS5 Pro. Ghost of Tsushima, whatever kind of stuff they have on that. Again, Spider-Man 2 can't run at 4K 60. It can on PS5 Pro. That list was better than showing the footage, because showing the footage made me go, I don't see the difference.
Yeah.
But if you told me,
it's a truly difficult thing to do.
I can get, if all you have to do was tell me. Mark Cerny could have just whispered sweet nothings in my ear, said, hey, buddy, you really like that Dragon's Dogma 2? And I would have said, no, I didn't really like it. But then he would have said, well, it runs at 4K 60 now, honey. How do you feel? You want to go be a Dogma guy? You want to be Dogma guy? Right? That's what I don't understand. There was just, I would have rather had been told, because that would have made more sense than what they showed.
Given how difficult it is to show these things, I agree with you, because this is why I think it's important to note how much this is for one particular section of the audience. It's that the average consumer, outside of people who just get so hyped that they want to buy something on the promise of more power, which definitely exists, but for the average consumer, watching those videos on the way that they're usually going to watch it, with their phone on YouTube set to auto, to where half the time, if they're in an area where it's starting to want to cut down, it dips down to 480p 30 frames per second to make sure the video keeps playing. They're not going to see the difference. They're not even going to see the difference if they try harder looking at a 6.4-inch cell phone screen at 1080p. You're still not going to see the difference enough. Right. And so I think the general consumer is exactly in your boat. And that's why I don't think that this is really for them. This is for the people who understand enough, or are just completely willing to be told there's more power. We promise there's more power, and you will see it when you get it, but we cannot really show it to you ahead of time.
Yeah.
And it's banking on that. And I think that this is something I almost wonder, and I think that there's almost no way they will, but I think your best way to do this would be like partner with Best Buy and places like that, where they have 4K LG OLEDs that have, full on 60 frames per second and everything. And you can be like, here are the games running. And we have one TV set up with a PS5 and Spider-Man 2 going on it. We have one set up with PS5 Pro, Spider-Man 2 on it. Look at the difference. You can feel it. You can visually see it, but you can feel it. Because, Chris, you and I talk a lot. 60 frames per second is a lot, really. Sometimes what you lose in graphical fidelity, the smoothness of the image seems to bring back a level of detail that gets lost in the blurriness of 30 frames per second, right? And I don't mean blur when you're standing still. I mean blur when you're moving, right? And so at that point, sometimes games actually look a little more realistic to me with a lower graphical detail, but because they're moving smoothly and they feel right. And so, yeah, frame rate's hard to show. The reason the PS4 Pro, I think, worked so much better is that all you were doing was showing a bump from 1080p to 4K. Most of the games still ran at 30 frames per second. You can show that on a phone screen really well.
Yeah.
You cannot make someone who doesn't understand frame rate and the benefit. You really just can't. You have to let them feel it, put it in their hands, or put it in front of their faces. So I'm very curious to see how this does, but I've thought from a long time, this is a difficult thing to market. I don't know how they're going to do it. And I still think that they're doing it about as best as you can for something like this. Unfortunately, it may not be enough. But I think that they kind of know that, and I don't think that they're expecting much. So,
yeah, I don't know. I don't have too much more to say about this. It's just, you don't fucking need it. Move on. And Sony announced a showcase.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too here. What's interesting is this also does work. You know how we already had Game Boost for PS4 games on PS5? There is PS5 Pro Game Boost, so it can give even more for those weird PS4 games that were just super unoptimized. So that's kind of interesting and cool to see.
I do want to point out one last thing. PS5 is trading in for $385 at GameStop.
Nice. Yeah.
That means the PS5 Pro would be $315. Do some math.
Well, before tax. But also, let's give a second here, Chris, because one thing that we didn't talk about a whole lot is the disk drive, which I think is, don't wrong, I would have loved for it to be on there, but I get why it's not. They don't need to. They've already swapped to the PS5 disk model being there. Why make two versions of the PS5 Pro and have two prices instead of just having one? I think that makes sense. But I've seen a lot of people talk about the stand and act as if the $30 of the stand is completely necessary. And I think that's kind of weird. So they're like, bare minimum, this is $730 because it doesn't come with a stand. Dude, my PS3 doesn't have a stand, and it's supposed to, and it just sits up on its end. I know people who have the original PS5 that came with a stand, and they didn't even put it on. They just have their PS5 standing up on its butt.
That's me. I lost it.
You know how many people I know who do that? I think it is insane to tell me that the $30 of the stand even matters. Now, the disk drive, fine. I think that's a fair argument to be made that that's an extra cost for people who want it. But also, numbers show that most people don't. I'm a huge fan of physical media, and you know that. But I think that I really don't mind this setup. My only problem with the disk drive on the PlayStation 5 is that you have to connect to the internet to activate it. And if they ever, for some reason, pull it down, the disk drive's pointless, and all your disk drive games are pointless. Mm-hmm. But I still think this is a pretty cool half step. If most people are willing to go digital, you can just make your system basically be one price point. And then if you want the disk drive, you're good. You go buy it. Yeah, I don't know. I think that one's interesting. But there's other cool stuff. Wi-Fi 7 instead of Wi-Fi 6 is nice to see. Also, somebody did mention, and there was the big running jokes that the PS4, or rather the PS5 box, had 8K on the outside, like it was going to be able to do 8K gaming. There was something I read earlier where the demo that they had set up for PS5 Pro Gran Turismo, if I'm not mistaken, they had it to where you could play it at 4K 60 with ray tracing, or you could play it at 8K 60, no ray tracing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of wild because that means we actually are seeing 8K gaming when no one within real reason thought that was going to be a real selling point. And I still don't think it is, but it's cool that it's supported at all. Even if it's one game, it's like, look, our 8K promise has been made true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When do you think we see 8K Blu-rays?
I don't know. Ask Blake.
Yeah, they don't even want to carry much of the 4K Blu-ray. I don't think there's much hope for 8K. All that said, yeah, look, I don't have much more there. We've got a couple of questions that I think are interesting to answer, and we got one that came in a little late on the wire for the Concord conversation. But I'm a little curious to see if you want to think anything more of it. But let's get to the rest of the ones real quick that we did not see initially. First one is Jehudi MD, one of our longtime listeners, longtime patrons. He says, what is your favorite season of the year? Chris, you and I are in very different parts of the country. We are both in U.S., so that is, of course, different context than some of the listeners who I know are overseas for us. I'm curious how much ours line up just based off of personal preference and geography. So what's your favorite season?
Spring.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So explain to me what you love about spring in Connecticut.
That's when the Boston Red Sox start playing.
So your favorite season's tied to what events are happening in that season?
Yeah, dude, I play video games. I don't go outside. What the fuck do you mean?
Yeah, fair enough.
The actual answer, because I do live in New England, I am a big spring guy for baseball, but there is no beating a New England fall.
Yeah.
It's like half the reason I want to live in Vermont. It's so gorgeous.
So for where I live in right in between Texas and Arkansas, we don't really get much of a spring or a fall. Spring is very short-lived, and then quickly it just becomes hot as fuck. And then fall is very short-lived before it just gets cold. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, it's really difficult to say that spring or fall are your favorite in my area because they don't really last long enough. But I'll tell you, we're kind of hitting into the area of fall where you kind of have that slightly cool breeze going. It's short-lived. It's going to be hot as fuck again. Like here last year on Halloween, I think it was like 99 degrees. So with all that in mind, I really like fall for the same reason I like spring, where it's that perfect in-between temperature. Mm-hmm. But in my actual area where it's either summer or winter, for the most part, I much prefer winter. So
hell yeah.
Yeah. But I also like winter, generally speaking. But I think I'd like spring if I lived in an area that had more of one.
Yeah.
I'm not real familiar with what it even looks like, but I'm familiar with what winter looks like because I have family in an area where it snows and it's pretty and it feels good.
Spring is great because you never need a sweater, but you should bring one. And that's what makes spring great.
See, I think that's where personal experience is going to get me. I get hot so easily that, okay, you remember when I came to Boston, right? Mm-hmm. It was like December, January, so cold season. I think it was 17 degrees there, if I recall correctly. I'd spend like 20 minutes outside here and there because of what we were doing. I did not bring a jacket. I was wearing a short sleeve shirt and jeans. Mm-hmm. I loved it.
Yeah.
And everyone else is like, how? And I'm like, don't get me wrong. If I worked in this and I needed to be out here for like an hour plus, yeah, I'd have a jacket. But for like leisurely strolls outside for like 15, 20 minutes max, oh, what lovely weather. It was a cold that didn't bite you so hard. It was just kind of dry. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I loved it. I really liked the way, and now I know that's a little different. It's what, a little south of you? Is that what it was?
Yeah. No, Boston's north, I think. Here's
north of you, okay.
The thing, I don't know, I need a GPS to navigate my own fucking town. I've lived here for 31 years. Are you a hot or cold person? This is important. I'm pretty sure you're going to...
I like being cold.
That is the right answer. I don't understand people who say hot. Simply because I can always put on more clothes, I can, at a certain point, I can't take anything else off.
Dude, that has been my longest running argument my entire life. Is no matter how cold you are, you can find more ways to cover.
Yep.
At some point,
eventually I'm going to be hot and naked.
You want to pull your skin off, and you just can't.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need to be hot. I think
that depends on where you are, right? Because like I've noticed, and it's kind of the same thing where I was talking about when I got back to DFW from Boston, right? We flew out of Boston's airport. It was 17 degrees and I was fine. As soon as I stepped off the plane and into the 17 degree, it was like 23 degrees in DFW. So it was warmer and it was immediately more uncomfortable. I was like, I wish I had a jacket now because this is a biting, uncomfortable cold. Mm-hmm. So from what I understand, there's differences of heat the same too. It's pretty humid here. So I fucking hate being hot because I do not want to be sweating all of my water out. It's 103 degrees and it feels like 112 because of humidity. That is awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I can't add to that. It's not as bad as you, but when it happens, it's bad. But look, I work in kitchens, man. Honestly, like heat. I don't like it, but I can deal.
Yeah.
Been in 110 degree kitchens running for hours on end. So.
Well, there we have it. All right. Next question, Chris, I'll throw to you first is, comes from Rude Cold, longtime listener, super longtime listener, longtime patron. If you could pick only one new game to play that is coming out before Christmas, what would it be and why? And to clarify, yes, it's a game that is not out yet, but will be out by Christmas. If you can only play one of those, which one would it be and why?
I got to look up a list, so why don't you go?
Yeah, it's actually what I'm doing right now. Because as I was kind of talking about with being those few months working consistently and getting kind of used to playing indie games on the portal, it's like I've been a little disconnected from gaming as a whole, even some of the newer indie games, right? So there's some that are on my list that are out now that I think look interesting. And some of them, Chris, are ones you've already bought and we've been talking about playing. And Saul was talking about the, Lord, what is that game you just bought?
Another Crab Adventure? Or
no, the
Another Crab's
Core?
Treasure?
What is that game? It's like
Core Keeper.
Yeah, Core Keeper. That's like a Terraria style game. So that looks really cool. But as for the rest of the year and thinking about what's coming, it's complicated because I'd say like if it's something I plan on playing that actually has a date, part of it's like, what are you willing to really fully give that to? I almost want to say Silent Hill 2, but I have a feeling that game may just be in a weird spot of trying to modernize and getting stuck. So I don't know if I want to go that far. But that doesn't seem like a bad option. I think I would have said Avowed if it hadn't gotten moved to next year. Mm-hmm. But since it has, I think that's a difficult one to throw out now. Sonic and Shadow Generations is a pretty good option. I like the Sonic games. I like the Generations games, and I love Shadow. So that'd be a good one. And Sonic 3 is coming, so there's a lot of hype behind that. So I think it kind of ticks a lot of boxes for me. I love platformers. I love Sonic when the games are actually done well. Generations was done well. And since this is essentially a remaster of Generations with new levels, including Shadow, I think this is safe to say that this is kind of an immediate banger of a game. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty happy with that answer. If I wanted to move away, since that is technically a remaster, maybe Stalker 2, because it looks pretty sweet.
Okay, I'm going to give you two of them because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, one of them comes out in 2 days. So I don't feel like that's a great answer. So just verifying that. Let's see. Release date. Yep, September 13th. So my games are Evo Tinction, which looks fucking sick. And then I feel like my next answer should be fairly obvious to everyone here, but it would be Metaphor Refantasio.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that was on yours, but I was curious if that was going to be your immediate list or not. So, uh-oh. We're having technology failure. My headphones are messing up. I had to borrow my wife's. It's time for me to buy new headphones. So
trying to use these links or whatever, and it's just not going well.
Oh, I forgot you got the links.
Yeah. They're great for the phone and Portal, but I don't love them on my computer.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, I think it's hard. There's one game that I want to reference here, and because I've got my controller back for my VR and that's back on the table, I'm very, very curious to see how Alien Rogue Incursion ends up being on VR. And a lot of that comes down to, I think Alien can make great games, and we often don't see them make great games.
Isolation's good.
But if you can get a great game out of them, and I think VR is a very easy medium to have not only a great Alien game, but a great VR game kind of tie together. So it's rare that you hear people talk about VR, particularly in that regard. But when VR can hit, let me tell you, buddy, it can really hit. So that'd be pretty cool. If Monument Valley wasn't coming to Netflix, that might have been one of my options. But
so what's your can you recap your games?
Yeah, I'd say Sonic and Shadow Generations, Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl looks excellent, dude. It looks so good. I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff. Mm-hmm. I did not think it was going to hit this year, but it seems like there's no reason it won't. That game looks really cool. The only reason I hesitate on it is I think that there's a really high chance this game still comes to PlayStation, and I kind of want to wait to play it so that I could just play it on PlayStation.
It's announced. It's only exclusive for 3 months.
Oh, see, I didn't know that was actually the window, but I had a feeling, but I knew it was temporary for Xbox's exclusivity, which I still think it's a cool exclusive get, by the way. I think that's actually a really cool game to see. But yeah, that and then Alien Rogue Incursion. And that's a lot of, I think that there's still ground to be made in the VR area, and I will always have an interest in checking it out. Also, I want to throw in, as I expected, no talk of VR2 during the PS5 Pro talk, which I knew. They are so done with that even though it will inherently benefit from all this, my immediate question, Chris, is will ray tracing be in gameplay in VR2 for Gran Turismo 7? Because you're making an already killer VR2 title even more killer. But we'll see. Anyway, Chris, you look like you had a revelation. What was your revelation here?
I almost don't want to say it because it's mean, but I just realized that I can trade in my PSVR 2 and my PS5 and pay like $100 for the fucking PS5 Pro.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe you are in the market.
Kobe.
Jeez. Okay. Yeah. Last question we have here. Actually, I'll throw it over here. It's one that came from longtime listener, longtime patron, No Fate over on Twitter. And he says, I keep hearing Concord failed because we never asked for it. So this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Chris. He says, if Concord was inspired by Overwatch all them years ago, what is Sony's best way to find out what we want and are still likely to want after a 5-year development cycle? Could the time money be better spent on titles we've asked for? So I think it's a bit of the core of the question that I really like is, how do you best think Sony can find a way to try and target what people want and know that it's worthy of a development to where people will still likely want it in 5 years? And that's hard. Because one of the things that I talked about with two great games, and throw that up there out front, but I think one of the problems that happened with both God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West, and the fact that both of them were generally received more poorly, now not poor, but just they weren't as well received, let me reframe it that way, as their first entries in many ways. I think a lot of that came from the fact that those games took about 4 to 5 years to make, and as much as people still enjoyed what they were, it kind of did feel like, oh, I just got more of exactly what I played, but it took double the time it used to take for this to happen. And so I think it's really difficult to find out where the industry is going to go in a 4 to 5 year period. And I think it's almost impossible to really know if any investment is going to be valid in 4 to 5 years. I think it's always a risk, but there has to be at least a way to make them slightly more calculated. So, Chris, do you have a thought process in mind of how you minimize investing in something that you cannot be sure will be a valid product when it's ready?
Every product is a valid product if it's good.
I think that's fair. But I think that you would also agree, or I would imagine you would agree, that sometimes even good products that should be valid still do not make it because they're in a section of the market where it's just too crowded. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, clearly I do. Yeah, for sure. But I think the thing that I would say is that while true, just because it doesn't hit doesn't mean it wasn't good. And it doesn't mean it wasn't a good decision.
Absolutely. And I think Concord's a really interesting one to point out and look at here because it is clearly a failure by every metric. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think this conversation might be a little different and this question might hit a little different. If you were to ask the exact same question, but we have the context of Concord hitting 1 million players and having 3 or 4 months of being a pretty well-rotated game and then dying, right? If that was the conversation, I think you could be a little more nuanced and you can go, well, who knows? But I think Concord's weird because it was an immediate failure.
Right.
In a way that few games are. So, yeah. I wish I had a better answer on it too, but I think a lot of it comes down to this is what I'll say. Sean Layden, years back, said a quote that I absolutely loved, and I think it was really a cool way to look into how PlayStation viewed their internal development. And I think it even helped you identify the games that maybe didn't do as well as anybody would have hoped, but they still felt like they checked a box for Sony that you could understand. And Sean Layden was saying that all game pitches that come through need to hit at least one of 3 marks. It either needs to be the first of its kind and something that is really not seen out there. It needs to be so exceptional in a genre that already exists to where it's almost impossible to deny it. Kind of think of how Uncharted at that time, Uncharted didn't do anything really that new in the third person action adventure realm. It just did it at such a high quality level that you couldn't deny it. And it had charm and it was fun. Right. And then the last was must. And he goes, those are games that we must make to support product that we've put out there. And he gave examples. We must attempt to make VR games because we put out a VR accessory. Therefore, we must make VR games, or at least attempt. I think my problem here, do you think, and now this is important, this seems to have all happened after Sean Layden. So maybe that thought process has gone out of the window and that's no longer actively in Sony. But let's go back and let's view it as Sony still looks at it that way.
Okay.
Which box do you think Concord was intended to fill when it got approved?
Must.
You think, and that was the only one I could even remotely go into, is they didn't launch a product, but I'm assuming your thought process is we must attempt to break into this burgeoning market. Is that what your thought process is?
We must have a Fortnite. We must make 100% of microtransaction revenue.
Yeah, that's the closest I can give to it, because it clearly doesn't hit the first, and it doesn't even, as for as well made as the game is, it is not best, right?
But it's weird because I almost wonder what the best one even means, because like Moonstone Island is not particularly in any of these categories. Obviously, Sony didn't make that game, but I'm using it as an example. But I don't think that makes it less of a game that you should play. Just because Stardew Valley does what it's doing better without the Pokemon twist doesn't mean that Moonstone Island shouldn't exist. So it's a weird... I don't know.
No, I agree with you. I think what it comes down to is that Sony is investing big money because these games are going to end up being showcases for their system. That is ultimately what they are intended to be. And therefore, they give more budget than a lot of AAA games get, or they give comparable budget to AAA games that are multi-platform, even though these have a ultimately smaller base of potential customers, right? And so I think when you pull all of that together, it starts to be that all games can be made for any reason. But if we're going to fund very expensive games, it needs to hit one of these marks. It needs to be that we understood that it was either the first of its kind or among the first of its kind, either best in class in terms of it's doing something at this genre at such a high quality level that you cannot deny it, or it's a must. It's something that we have to support. And I think that there's a fair argument to say that Sony understood that everyone else in this market had really attempted to go into the games as a service. And while Sony had a little faux games as a service games with things like MLB The Show and even Gran Turismo Sport, that they did not really have a full-blood games as a service game that was designed and intended to be that way and to be a forever game. MLB is always intended to eventually be replaced by its successor. Gran Turismo was eventually going to get another Gran Turismo that was more of a mainline game that does have a non-online component that's very important to it. And so I think that I can understand the intuition of how you land on a Helldivers 2 or how you land on a Concord, and that these are games that can be a more traditional games as a service, and they must attempt to be part of that market.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
So to that point, though, I have to go back through. If you do feel like you must be part of an established market, and the must is not to support a product that you've put out, I still think you have to kind of go through this thing of Sony should try and hold to that market as close as they can with the money they're investing, and say, maybe we can try and have a little bit of everything. If it's a must that we make a game as a games as a service, then we need to try our best to have it be among the highest quality of games as a service that are out there. And we need to have it have something about it that is the first that you've ever seen in this. And that's where I go towards pointing at things like Destiny having Gambit. And it's a good example of something that you haven't immediately seen and you can't immediately go, that's just that game, and that game. Right? That's a good way to start. And so I don't know. But I also want to turn the question around on you, No Fate, and say, how do we as the audience genuinely, how can we determine what's best for Sony to invest in? And how can we make that decision and know that the decision that we made will be supported by the rest of the player base? And I think that falls back into there's a lot of, it's great to follow fans and it's great to listen to fans and take what they're saying and utilize that information somewhere, as long as you can do so with a reasonable price. I think that fan feedback is the only reason we got a Medieval remake, right? And that's cool. But Medieval remake also cost almost nothing to make.
And sold almost nothing.
Yeah, which is probably fine. I'm not even kidding. That game had to have been dirt cheap to make. And so it's fine. But that's because it's a thing you can do for the fans that ultimately is a good PR win, and you have a chance of it maybe doing better than you ever anticipated, even though it's pretty low. I don't think you can do that with a lot of the games that people throw out there. I don't think you can do that by trying to pull Killzone back up from the grave. I adore Killzone. I just don't think you can pull that IP into relevancy suddenly, as much as I would love to see them try.
Yeah.
But I also want to throw out there, some IP does have a spark, and some IP might be worth revisiting. And I think you have to look at where the market's at, and if the IP that you're suggesting pulling back up fills a niche in the market that's currently not being serviced by anything of size. And if you can pull it off, I think now might be the time for Twisted Metal. And I think, unfortunately, the Twisted Metal game that they canned just must not have been a high enough quality to fill the niche the way that they wanted to. But I still think it's the right time for Twisted Metal, because there's not a lot going on in that sphere. Now, what other IP they have that might be able to fill that? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Maybe it is Resistance. Maybe it is Killzone, but I doubt it. I think Resistance was sold better than Killzone, so maybe Resistance has a little bit more of a ground to stand on, but I don't know. It's difficult to say. So maybe it makes more sense to go into SOCOMs and things that are a little more timeless, since SOCOM is just realistic combat. So either way. Yeah, that's as much as I have to say. I think it's a difficult question, though I do like it. So what, at the end of the day, No Fate, what title are you asking for?
Yeah.
So, all right, that wraps it up, Chris.
Hell yeah, brother.
All right, man. Thanks for joining me another episode. I'm a little surprised that we were as similar on the PS5 Pro as we were.
It's very funny because I made that document specifically to argue with you.
Yeah, you thought I was going to be against this?
I was ready to fight. I was like, I know where I was like, he's going to come in. It's too expensive. And then I'm like, oh, well, the audience is wrong.
Yeah. And it's funny because as I was thinking about this, I thought to myself, I know I bring up cost often, and I think cost is a considerable thing to do. But I think as you go across the board, is there a reason to question why a remake of Until Dawn that looks marginally better and does really nothing new cost more than the original Until Dawn?
Yeah.
That can be played on PS4 or on PS5 right now. There's a reason for me to argue that. And then there's a reason for me to argue personal choice. Like, I can't see the value of The Last of Us Part 1 being $70 with no multiplayer. I still bought it, but it's one of those things where if I didn't have Sony rewards points, I would have probably held off on buying it for a longer time. You know what I'm saying? It's that kind of thing. So it's the same thing here, though, right? It's like, yeah, you have every right to complain about the price. But I think to act as though anybody else who's looking at this and going, yeah, this ticks enough boxes for me and I'm cool with this. No one's crazy for wanting to buy the PS5 Pro at $700, and Sony's not crazy for putting the device out there at that price point.
Yeah.
So, but I'll be curious to see how the internet continues to kind of unravel this and what it looks like. Because what I've really learned about Sony, they can't win. It doesn't matter what's happening. They cannot win. And for every micro win they have, like Astrobot, someone's going to bitch about something else. People are bitching about Astrobot being $60. They can't even win with their wins.
Dude, you want to know how they're going to win?
How's
you can
that?
mark my words. I am willing to bet on this. State of play ends with Bloodborne. I promise you. After Concord, after
Bloodborne PS5 Pro remastered.
Dude, Bloodborne PS5 Pro exclusive.
Fucking Xenoblade Chronicles new 3DS exclusive over here. Yeah, what a wild move
run
that would be.
Bloodborne without the PSSR tech.
Give me a second here, for real though, dude. 4K 60 Bloodborne?
Dude, the best Souls game.
Bro, what?
And it'll be great because at the end of the game, we'll get the trailer for Blue Point's Bloodborne too. I would seriously bet that Bloodborne is there.
If there was ever a time to pull it out,
you need the dub.
I almost wonder if it's been ready for a while and they were just waiting. Like, if we have any bad PR, and then I bet you Concord happened and they were like, we could turn it all around with Bloodborne right now. And then they wait. In case there's a negative reaction to the PS5 Pro price, we need this in our back pocket.
It's like the Astrobot reviews calmed them down for a minute, and now they're like, "Oh
good.
shit,
we got that 94. Let's go. That's our EpiPen."
Right next to the glass case that says "Kill Concord" is the Bloodborne 60 FPS port.
Lance McDonald's just in there. He orchestrated the whole thing by himself.
Like, yes, I've been building the emulator on purpose. Now we have it.
So let's end the episode on this because I thought it was wild. Mm-hmm. People are finally getting PS4 emulation off the ground on PC. And part of the reason this happened with PS3 emulation, this is why I love that. The Souls community are insane. The PS3 emulation took huge steps forward specifically because of people wanting to play Demon's Souls on PC. And so people went in and found ways to fix some of the issues with the PS3 emulation to get Demon's Souls running correctly. And then they took that information and extrapolated it to other PS3 emulations so that they could improve it across the board. And people are doing that right now with PS4 emulation so that they can finally play Bloodborne on PC. So the game, it can finally boot up games, and it's been able to boot up games for a while, but you couldn't really do anything in them. Now you can boot up games and it can sort of play some games, but people are going in and specifically getting the emulator to hyper work with Bloodborne so that they can hopefully make Bloodborne playable on PC.
I hope they do it just for Sony the day they figure it out to be like, there's a free update. Fuck you.
I just love it because it's so weird that the Souls community and PlayStation exclusive Souls games just tend to be the crux of we are going to figure this emulation out because fuck you, Sony. That's why. And you know what's worse? They got Demon's Souls running on PS3 emulation at 4K, and then Sony was like, "We remade Demon's Souls."
So in other words, history is repeating itself. And I'm right.
Yeah, so there's a decent chance that we get a Bloodborne remake / remaster anytime.
It's going to be so exciting for Bloodborne 2 to be announced right after that. Woo! Hunter, get your start under the moon in Bloodborne Remastered. And then in 2026, enhanced for the PS5 Pro, Bluepoint presents Demon's Souls 2.
You end up being wrong because it's not Bloodborne 2, it's Demon's Souls 2.
That would be the worst twist of events.
That would be so funny, and also would make way more sense because they spent way more time with Demon's Souls movement. So building off of it would make more sense almost.
You right. Ending the shout out to the movie Rebel Ridge. That shit is fire. Go watch that movie right now.
Well, there you have it. Chris's glowing recommendation for Rebel Ridge. So what is this? Is this on Netflix or something?
It's Rambo, except with good acting.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. Shots fired.
Adrian!
The cops.
I'm not gonna sit here and act like I didn't go watch Rambo 4 in theaters and just absolutely fucking revel in seeing these dudes run across the rice fields and get fucking exploded.
I love Rambo. It's just not. It's not good acting.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Don't lie to yourself. It's a good movie. It doesn't mean the acting's good.
Yeah, right. It's like when a game's good but the story sucked. You're like, oh, the game was still great, but I mean, you know.
I'm saying this just to hurt Blake. I love you, but the lead performance is so good that I cannot wait for him to be in Marvel movies for the next 15 years.
Oh, geez. Well, to be fair, that does happen, right? The conversation a few years back was like, is it going to be Timothée Chalamet or what's the dude who plays Drake in Spider-Man? I can't think of his name right now.
Tom Holland.
How
did you get the harder name to remember right?
I don't know, man. I've seen Timothée Chalamet more recently.
Motherfucker's name is Tom. It's 3 letters, bro.
Yeah. Anyway, so Tom Holland, that was a thing for a while. I was like, which one's going to be the new Hollywood leading man coming up? And now Tom Holland's been like exclusively Spider-Man for the most part.
Yeah.
And didn't they just announce he's coming back for Spider-Man 4?
Yep. Oh, of course. Why wouldn't he? Buku bucks. You saw what Robert Downey Jr. is getting made? Oh, getting paid?
Cannot believe. That's how, dude, I have never seen a company be more desperate than that. That's how you know they need that shit.
Strongly disagree, but that's okay. I think it's a fine pick.
Let me say this. I don't think that they'd have done that at that level of pay had it not been for the fact that the majority of post-Endgame has been criticized and not done super well.
Sure. All I know is that I'm very excited for Tom Holland's Magneto. So that's going to be fun.
Oh,
Chris
man.
Pratt's Professor X. I shouldn't even said that. It made me sick. It made me physically ill, and I like Chris Pratt.
Dude, I'm going to be real. After watching Deadpool Wolverine, I am glad that it was a send-off to the Fox era of Marvel. But I also think if you look at everything that they have done with X-Men since getting Fox and X-Men back under the Disney umbrella because of the purchase, they have not done anything original with X-Men. I don't know that they know what to do. I'm being dead honest. I think that they don't know what to do. And so the easiest way is to continuously pay homage to the years and years of X-Men movie that people did enjoy. I'll be really curious to see what Marvel does when they finally bring in original X-Men characters into their own universe.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
But they've had so much trouble even getting Blade to work that I think that they are starting to learn that certain heroes don't gel well with other heroes in the way that they're hoping for in this real PG-13, everybody can watch everything world. But my biggest thing is that Deadpool Wolverine was rated R, which shows that they're willing to stretch if they think it'll be successful.
Well, I think they had said relatively recently that Blade would be rated R.
Yeah, and it needs to be. I mean, it's going to be super weird to have a vampire movie where you kill and slice vampires with a dude who uses swords.
Mm-hmm. They'll make the blood silver. And you're going to show
no blood?
They'll make it silver. It'll be sweat.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Part of me does wish that they would have tried and actually put out a PG-13 Deadpool 3 because it just would have been like, I want to see how you even try to strip that down. And I have a feeling that they would do the same thing that Sony's done with the Venom movies, which are fun and I enjoy them. But those movies try so hard not to be rated R that it makes me laugh constantly.
Dude, the new one looks fucking awesome. The Venom horse.
Here's the thing.
Hell yeah.
Those movies are both fun and so bad that they turn back around to being good that I enjoy them legitimately.
Let Them Be Carnage sucks, but it rocks.
It's so good. I know.
Fucking Woody Harrelson is incredible in that thing.
And dude, I'm going to be real. The fight scenes are still sick. The church fight scene in Let There Be Carnage fucking slaps. It's really cool.
It's great.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. All right, Chris. Well, as always, we're going to shout out our patrons who went over to patreon.com/Nartech and give us as little as $1 per month to keep this show going. We are so thankful for y'all. You help us keep the show running without having to dig into our own pockets, and that makes it a lot easier for us to continue to pull off. So, as we do currently, For every person who is a patron, we give a shout out to thank them. And that starts with Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Matt Tubbs, Easton328, Lecheon69, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villalobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Matthew Green, and Sean Sanderud. Thanks to each and every one of you. We'll see you next week.
Bye.